Hey my dear listener, before we start, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Comment down where are you from and what's your time right now. Let's jump into the video. Story 1. The Skywatchers of Ancient Mesopotamia. Long before clocks ticked or calendars printed dates, people in the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers relied entirely on the sky above to organize their lives. In these ancient Mesopotamian settlements, Uruk, Babylon, and countless smaller towns, the rhythm of daily existence was dictated not by machines, but by the movement of the sun across the heavens and the changing patterns of the stars. For a society that depended on agriculture and irrigation, understanding the sky was not a pastime, it was survival. The fertile soil of Mesopotamia, enriched by seasonal flooding, promised abundance, but only if its inhabitants knew precisely when to plant and when to harvest. Too early, and the young shoots might be washed away by unpredictable surges. Too late, and the crops would wither under the unrelenting summer sun. The Skywatchers, as historians have come to call them, were the farmers, scribes, and early astronomers who devoted their lives to observing the heavens. Each day they rose with the first light, noting the angle of the sun against the horizon and the length of the shadows it cast. These shadows, cast by simple poles or stones placed strategically in the fields, were rudimentary sundials. Yet they were precise enough to divide the day into work periods, ritual moments, and times for irrigation. Irrigation itself was a delicate art. Channels cut into the land carried water from the rivers to crops that could not survive the dry season. But these channels needed careful timing. Too long a diversion, and villages downstream would go thirsty. Too short, and fields would dry prematurely. The Skywatchers developed methods for tracking the passage of hours without measuring them in minutes. They observed the sun's height at midday, the time of sunrise, and the first appearance of certain stars at night, which marked the approach of planting or harvest seasons. Some of the brightest, like Sirius and Aldebaran, became markers in their agricultural calendar, signaling the arrival of crucial periods for barley or wheat. Daily life in Mesopotamia also revolved around the sky in ways that were subtle but pervasive. Markets opened with the rising sun, and traders timed their journeys along the river with its movement. Religious ceremonies, too, were attuned to celestial events. Temples were often aligned with solar or lunar paths. Priests could predict when certain rituals should be performed simply by observing the sky. For ordinary villagers, these cosmic patterns were encoded into oral traditions. Fathers taught sons and daughters which stars to watch, which shadows to measure, and which riverbanks would flood when. It was a culture where knowledge of the sky was intertwined with daily survival, law, and even storytelling. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Mesopotamian skywatching was its connection to written records. Early cuneiform tablets, often clay fragments baked to permanence, contain meticulous observations of the heavens. Some tablets list lunar cycles, others chart solar positions or the appearances of planets like Venus. While modern readers may find the descriptions dry or technical, they reveal a society deeply invested in quantifying time in practical ways. The scribes, who often trained under temple supervision, became intermediaries between nature's cycles and human activity. Farmers would consult them to know the optimal moment to sow or reap, and rulers relied on them to schedule civic or religious events. In this sense, the Skywatchers were both scientists and guardians of societal order. The work of these early astronomers was not always recognized for its full significance. From the perspective of the everyday villager, the act of marking a shadow or noting the rise of a star was mundane, a routine step in a long day of tending crops, feeding animals, and maintaining homes. But in aggregate, these small acts built the backbone of Mesopotamian civilization. Without the careful observation of the sun and stars, irrigation could fail, food supplies would dwindle, and famine would follow. It was not spectacular in the sense of monuments or battles, yet it was quietly heroic, a civilization sustained by attentiveness to patterns most of us today barely notice. Consider, for a moment, the precision required. A farmer planting barley could not rely on chance. Planting too early might lead to crop rot. Too late could result in poor yields. The skywatchers would often mark the horizon with stones or poles that corresponded to sunrise on specific days of the year. One can imagine a young apprentice standing at dawn, watching the tip of the sun peak above a distant hill, learning to estimate the hours of light remaining before evening. Over time, these observations were refined into patterns: a calendar of shadows, an agricultural timetable, a rhythm of life embedded entirely in the natural cycles of the sky. These were not abstract notions. They were essential to survival in a land both fertile and unforgiving. Even in domestic life, the sky dictated routines. Women working at home would adjust their labor according to the sun's position, grinding grain before the heat of midday, weaving under the soft light of late afternoon, and storing water collected from irrigation channels when the sun was high enough to evaporate moisture efficiently. Children grew up knowing the sky's cues as intimately as their parents, learning which constellations would appear in which months, which stars indicated seasonal winds, and which lunar phases were considered auspicious. This knowledge was practical, yet it imbued daily life with a rhythm that connected every person to the cosmos above. Yet despite all their observations, the skywatchers were not infallible. Floods could come early or late, stars sometimes appeared obscured by clouds, and seasons could shift unpredictably. The reliance on celestial signs required both patience and humility. It was a system built on careful observation rather than certainty, a recognition that, while humans could measure and anticipate, nature always retained a degree of unpredictability. This awareness shaped a culture that valued meticulous recording, collaboration among communities, and respect for the subtle cues offered by the environment. As night fell over the plain, the same observers who had spent the day tracking shadows would turn their eyes to the heavens. Stars that had guided planting now guided reflection. Which alignments might signal a fruitful harvest next year? How could an unusual celestial event be interpreted an omen, a warning, or merely a quirk of nature? The skywatchers of Mesopotamia lived in constant dialogue with the sky, finding in its movements both instruction and mystery. By relying entirely on the sun and stars, they created a world in which ordinary life and cosmic order were inseparable. The days were long, the nights contemplative, and every routine from irrigation to weaving was part of a vast temporal pattern that had no need for clocks or calendars. They exemplified a human ingenuity born not from invention of machines, but from the patient observation of natural rhythms. And yet, even with all this knowledge, questions lingered. How could a society maintain such precision across generations? Could these methods withstand unforeseen changes in climate, floods, or celestial phenomena? It is here, at this intersection of routine and cosmic uncertainty, that the story pauses. The skywatchers had mastered the art of measuring time with their eyes and minds alone, but the real challenge was ensuring that their insights endured, that knowledge of the sky could guide not just one farmer, but entire generations. And in doing so, they laid the groundwork for some of humanity's earliest experiments with astronomy, mathematics, and record-keeping, a legacy that would ripple far beyond the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates. The survival of Mesopotamian communities depended on more than just observing the sky. It required translating celestial knowledge into practical, everyday actions. By the time a child reached adolescence in a settlement like Ur or Babylon, they would have witnessed a remarkable interplay between natural cycles and human organization. Fields were plowed and sown according to lunar phases, irrigation channels were opened and closed at precise intervals, and market activities were scheduled to align with periods of daylight. These routines were the living embodiment of astronomical knowledge, passed down orally and recorded meticulously on clay tablets. The scribes were at the heart of this system. In the temple complexes that dominated many Mesopotamian cities, Young apprentices learned not only cuneiform writing, but also the patterns of the sun, moon, and stars. They calculated the lengths of days and the timing of equinoxes, often using simple instruments. Shadow sticks to track solar altitude, water clocks for measuring shorter intervals, and early forms of the gnomon to determine midday. These calculations were far from abstract. They had direct consequences. A miscalculation in the timing of irrigation could drown crops, ruin food stores, and threaten entire communities. Thus, the scribe's work, dry, methodical, and often repetitive, was a cornerstone of survival. Religious life, too, was inseparable from these observations. Temples were aligned along precise celestial axes, allowing priests to predict the timing of festivals, sacrifices, and public ceremonies. The rising sun on specific days would illuminate statues or altars, signaling that it was time for ritual offerings. Even ordinary villagers understood these alignments intuitively. They learned that the first appearance of the Pleiades in the pre-dawn sky marked the beginning of planting season, or that a particular lunar phase called for water offerings to the river gods. In Mesopotamia, religion, agriculture, and astronomy were not separate domains. They were aspects of a single, integrated approach to living in tune with the cosmos. The Sky Watchers' expertise extended beyond farms and temples into the governance of the city-states themselves. Kings and administrators relied on scribes to provide accurate calendars for civic events, trade schedules, and military campaigns. Records show that disputes over land ownership, tax collection, and the allocation of water resources were often tied to the ability to demonstrate knowledge of seasonal timing. A farmer could claim rights to a flooded field if he could prove that the flood occurred according to the expected cycle of the Tigris, and administrators could coordinate grain distribution based on predicted harvest times. In this way, celestial observation became a tool for social order, turning the sky itself into a kind of arbiter of fairness and efficiency. Daily life reflected this celestial governance in ways both subtle and profound. Villagers rose with the first light, worked through periods of high sun, and paused in the late afternoon for communal meals or ritual observances. Markets opened in the cooler hours, when traders and buyers could see clearly and avoid the heat. Families coordinated labor across generations, often assigning tasks according to the position of the sun. Children and the elderly performed lighter work in the morning or evening, while adults tended to heavier labor at midday. In these rhythms, one sees a society in which astronomical knowledge was deeply embedded in the fabric of ordinary existence. The accuracy of these observations required careful attention to anomalies. Seasonal flooding was unpredictable, and celestial events were not always perfectly aligned with expectations. A solar eclipse, which modern astronomers can predict with precision, would have been interpreted as a significant omen, possibly signaling danger for crops, livestock, or even the ruling monarch. Priests and scribes would gather to study these occurrences, attempting to interpret patterns in a framework that blended empirical observation with divination. While these interpretations might seem superstitious to us today, they were critical for decision-making in a world without modern forecasting. The Skywatchers were, in effect, both scientists and counselors, translating natural phenomena into actionable guidance for entire communities. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Mesopotamian skywatching was its cumulative impact over generations. Farmers learned to recognize subtle changes in the behavior of the rivers, scribes recorded celestial observations for posterity, and religious leaders maintained rituals that aligned with the calendar. Over time, this created a body of knowledge that was remarkably consistent and sophisticated, even without mechanical clocks or standardized calendars. The cumulative effect of these observations allowed Mesopotamians to predict the timing of floods, the cycles of crops, and the course of celestial events with a level of accuracy that would astonish anyone unfamiliar with pre-modern societies. Yet this system was not without its tensions. The reliance on human observation meant that errors could accumulate. A misrecorded lunar phase, a misaligned sundial, or a misinterpreted omen could have real consequences for communities. Moreover, the system depended heavily on the continuity of knowledge across generations. Apprenticeship and oral transmission were critical. A break in this chain could disrupt agricultural cycles, ritual observances, and even the administration of justice. In some ways, the Skywatchers were engaged in a perpetual struggle to balance human imperfection with the reliability of natural patterns, a challenge that defined life in Mesopotamia more than any single innovation or conquest. Despite these challenges, the Mesopotamian approach to time had a profound cultural and intellectual legacy. The meticulous recording of celestial phenomena laid the groundwork for mathematics, astronomy, and early scientific reasoning. Observations that began as practical tools for survival evolved into abstract models of the universe, influencing generations of scholars and scribes. One can trace a direct line from the shadow sticks in a barley field to the sophisticated astronomical tables that appeared centuries later, and even to the broader intellectual traditions that would influence civilizations across the Near East. As dusk fell over the river plains, the Skywatchers would pause to reflect on the day's work. The sun had set, shadows had shifted, and the stars emerged in precise positions overhead. Yet questions remained, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Could their knowledge withstand the vagaries of nature indefinitely? How might climate shifts, unforeseen floods, or astronomical anomalies disrupt their carefully calibrated routines? And most intriguing of all, what was the limit of their understanding? Could the patterns of the heavens ever reveal the full extent of time, or would some aspects remain forever mysterious? It is in these lingering uncertainties that the Mesopotamian relationship with the sky reveals its depth. Observing the heavens was not merely a technical exercise. It was an engagement with the unknown, a recognition that while humans could measure, predict, and organize, they could not fully control the forces that governed their world. And in that humility, they found a rhythm that guided every aspect of life, from planting barley to interpreting omens, from scheduling civic duties to performing sacred rituals. The Skywatchers had mastered daily survival in a world ruled by the sun and stars, yet they also grappled with questions that stretched beyond any single season. Could their observations preserve society in times of change? Would future generations understand the methods and reasoning embedded in shadow sticks and celestial alignments? And ultimately, what would become of a civilization so tightly bound to the patterns of the heavens once those patterns shifted or the knowledge of them was lost? The sun rose once again over the plains of Mesopotamia, spilling its light over the canals and fields that had been tended with unwavering care for generations. For the Skywatchers, each dawn was both routine and revelation. Routine in the precision of measuring shadows, feeding livestock, and opening irrigation gates. Revelation in the quiet patterns of the heavens, offering guidance for survival, work, and ritual. By the time the first golden light touched the mud-brick walls of Ur, the rhythm of the day had already been determined by centuries of careful observation, trial and error, and meticulous record-keeping. Over the centuries, the Skywatchers developed methods so reliable that even in the absence of mechanical clocks, their society functioned with remarkable coordination. Farmers sowed their barley with confidence that the sun and stars would signal the optimal timing. Scribes, having grown skilled in the interpretation of celestial patterns, translated these signals into records that could survive the erosion of time. And priests, guardians of both ritual and knowledge, ensured that every festival, every sacrifice, and every public ceremony aligned with the movements of the heavens. In essence, the sky itself became the greatest administrator, ruler, and historian of Mesopotamia. One of the most enduring contributions of these Skywatchers was their integration of observation with written record. Clay tablets preserved the timing of floods, eclipses, and lunar cycles, creating a corpus of knowledge that was practical, predictive, and surprisingly scientific. Some of these tablets contain detailed calculations predicting the length of the year, the behavior of the moon, and even the appearances of Venus. While modern scholars often highlight their ceremonial or divinatory purposes, these observations were grounded in careful, systematic recording. They represent one of the earliest examples of empirical reasoning, an understanding that patterns in nature could guide human activity if observed patiently and consistently. The society they maintained was one of remarkable resilience. Seasonal floods, unexpected droughts, and political upheavals might have devastated less organized communities, but Mesopotamia endured. Farmers knew when to plant and when to harvest. Scribes knew how to adjust the calendars for irregular lunar cycles, and priests interpreted omens with an eye toward continuity and caution. Even in times of crisis, the Skywatchers' knowledge provided a stabilizing framework, giving communities a measure of control over an unpredictable environment. Yet life was not without uncertainty. Floods sometimes arrived earlier than predicted, clouds obscured critical stars, eclipses and unusual celestial events could inspire fear or hesitation. The Skywatchers had learned to blend empirical observation with cautious interpretation. Their world demanded both precision and humility, a recognition that even the best knowledge could not entirely overcome nature's unpredictability. In this delicate balance, one sees the essence of early civilization, the combination of human ingenuity and respect for forces greater than oneself. The legacy of the Mesopotamian Skywatchers extended far beyond survival. Their careful observation of celestial patterns influenced mathematics, astronomy, and even architecture. Temples, canals, and city layouts were designed with the sun and stars in mind. The conceptual leap from tracking shadows to understanding cycles laid the groundwork for timekeeping methods that would evolve for millennia. In essence, the mundane act of marking shadows with sticks and observing the moon became the foundation of an intellectual tradition that shaped human understanding of the universe. Perhaps the most profound lesson of Mesopotamia's Skywatchers lies in the quiet power of ordinary, sustained attention. No single eclipse, festival, or harvest defined them. Rather, it was the steady accumulation of knowledge day after day, generation after generation. Their contribution to civilization was not in dramatic invention or conquest, but in the patient calibration of human life to the rhythms of nature, a lesson that resonates even today, in a world dominated by digital clocks and artificial schedules. Even as cities rose and fell, as empires expanded and collapsed, the principles that guided the Skywatchers endured. Their observations were eventually inherited by Greek, Roman, and later Islamic astronomers, who refined the knowledge of the heavens and integrated it into calendars, navigation, and science. What began as a practical necessity, measuring time with the sun, stars, and shadows, transformed into a universal legacy, a demonstration of humanity's ability to find order in the cosmos and integrate it into daily life. And yet, questions lingered even for those who followed them. Could a society maintain such delicate harmony with natural cycles in a changing climate? Could the knowledge of the Skywatchers survive beyond the walls of temples and schools? As empires rose and fell, as conquerors destroyed cities and scribes recorded elsewhere, the challenge remained, ensuring that the quiet, meticulous understanding of the heavens persisted. The Skywatchers' story is a testament not only to human ingenuity, but also to the fragility and endurance of knowledge itself, a reminder that every shadow cast, every star noted, and every harvest timed carries echoes far beyond the moment. In the end, the Mesopotamian Skywatchers remind us that civilization is built as much on attention to the ordinary as on acts of grandeur. The sun rises and sets each day, stars wheel silently across the night sky, and people then as now must navigate life according to patterns both predictable and mysterious. By learning to read the sky, These early observers anchored human life to a rhythm greater than themselves, creating continuity, understanding, and survival in a world defined by uncertainty. Their story is a quiet triumph, a civilization guided not by kings alone, but by the patient, persistent eyes turned toward the heavens. Story 2. Egyptian Shadow Timekeepers. Long before mechanical clocks marked the passage of time, the people of ancient Egypt relied on a method both simple and profound: shadows. The sun, rising faithfully over the Nile each morning, became the ultimate arbiter of hours. From the sprawling fields along the riverbanks to the grand temples of Thebes and Heliopolis, daily life was synchronized with the movement of sunlight. And shadows were not mere silhouettes, they were instruments of survival, work, and ritual. In the vast desert plains that framed the Nile Valley, the daily cycle of light and dark dictated everything from the timing of agricultural labor to the scheduling of religious ceremonies. Farmers depended on the sun to guide planting, watering, and harvesting schedules, while laborers constructing monumental tombs and temples relied on the predictable rhythm of daylight. The earliest Egyptian timekeepers, often priests or specially trained workers, began using vertical styx gnomons to measure the length and direction of shadows. By tracking how the shadows shifted throughout the day, they could divide daylight into segments and determine approximate hours, creating a practical schedule without any mechanical device. Obelisks, those towering stone monuments that today draw admiration for their scale and artistry, were not merely symbols of royal power. They were carefully designed tools for tracking time. Strategically placed in temple courtyards, obelisks cast shadows across marked lines or stones that indicated the hour. At sunrise, a shadow might align with one marker, signaling the beginning of morning prayers or the opening of markets. By midday, the shadow would shrink and point directly north, offering a natural reference for noon. As the afternoon progressed, its movement provided guidance for tasks, rest periods, and evening preparations. Even the common laborer, whose life revolved around bread, grain, and river irrigation, came to internalize the rhythm of the sun through the daily observation of shadows. Religious rituals, in particular, depended on precise timing. Temples were constructed with alignments that reflected solar events such as solstices and equinoxes. During these celestial moments, sunlight would penetrate sanctuaries to illuminate statues or altars in exact patterns, creating a visual connection between the heavens and human worship. Priests observed these occurrences with meticulous care, using them not only to plan religious ceremonies, but also to maintain the authority of their offices. To an ordinary observer, these alignments might seem like awe-inspiring magic, yet they were grounded in careful observation of the sun's path across the sky. Beyond temples, even the scheduling of civic life was guided by shadows. Merchants relied on these natural timekeepers to open shops and coordinate trade, while administrators used solar observations to schedule the collection of taxes, delivery of grain, and mobilization of labor for public works. In this way, Egypt's daily life was intertwined with astronomy, turning shadows into instruments of social order and efficiency. Farmers and laborers alike became intimately aware of how the length and direction of shadows could dictate the rhythm of their day, connecting ordinary routines to cosmic cycles. The development of these methods was not instantaneous. Early records suggest that Egyptians experimented for centuries with gnomons and shadow markers before achieving consistent results. Clay, stone, and wood served as materials for sundials and markers, while scribes recorded the positions of shadows and the corresponding hours on papyrus. These records allowed them to refine their understanding over generations, gradually improving the accuracy of timekeeping and creating the first reliable systems to divide daylight into equal segments. Interestingly, these techniques were also adapted to agriculture. The timing of irrigation depended not only on the seasonal flow of the Nile, but also on the time of day. Watering fields during the cooler hours of morning and late afternoon reduced evaporation, preserved labor energy, and maximized crop yield. Farmers watched shadows as carefully as they watched the river itself, combining environmental observation with celestial knowledge. In essence, Egyptian society developed a multi-layered understanding of time, one rooted in the heavens, yet applied pragmatically to everyday work and survival. However, this reliance on shadows and sunlight had limitations. Cloudy days, unusual solar events, or architectural obstructions could render the shadow-based system less precise. To mitigate these challenges, Egyptians often combined solar observation with other natural cues, such as the position of specific stars, the behavior of the Nile, or even seasonal temperature changes. This integration of multiple indicators created a robust, flexible method for timekeeping, one that balanced precision with adaptability, ensuring that daily life could continue smoothly even when one element of observation was obscured. The social dimension of this practice was equally important. Children learned from a young age to read shadows and track sunlight, internalizing temporal rhythms through observation and repetition. Families coordinated chores, meals, and religious observances according to the movement of shadows, creating a shared sense of temporal awareness across generations. Laborers constructing massive monuments knew when to pause for rest or distribute water based on the sun's angle. Even minor errors in reading these indicators could disrupt the daily routine, demonstrating just how dependent Egyptian society had become on natural measures of time. Yet, for all their sophistication, Egyptians remained deeply attuned to uncertainty. Floods could alter agricultural schedules, eclipses could cause alarm, and seasonal variations occasionally shifted expectations. The skywatchers of Egypt, priests, scribes, and observant farmers, had to maintain a constant dialogue with the environment, reconciling precision with adaptability. Their methods required patience, attention, and humility, qualities that defined both their society and its remarkable ability to endure for millennia. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, stretching shadows across the Nile's floodplains, Egyptians paused to reflect. The day had been measured, work had been accomplished, and rituals had been performed, all according to the silent guidance of light and shadow. Yet, questions remained in the minds of the observant. How could they ensure accuracy across generations? Could this knowledge survive the unpredictable shifts of river, sun, and sky? And as the stars emerged, offering a new layer of celestial guidance, how much more could they learn about the universe's hidden patterns? The Egyptians had mastered the day by mastering its light, yet they stood at the threshold of deeper understanding. They had tamed the rhythm of daylight for survival, labor, and worship, but the mysteries of night, the movements of distant stars, and the patterns of planets remained, waiting for future observers to decode. By the time the sun reached its zenith over the Nile, the Egyptian landscape was a living demonstration of humanity's partnership with light. Fields of barley and wheat shimmered under the midday glare, irrigation channels glinted as water flowed in measured patterns, and monumental structures cast shadows that not only defined space, but also measured time. For the Egyptians, shadows were far more than passive consequences of sunlight. They were instruments of order, discipline, and planning. In agricultural life, the timing of labor was critical. Farmers could not rely solely on experience or intuition. Survival depended on careful alignment of work with the sun's progress. Shadow-based timekeeping allowed communities to coordinate planting and harvesting, regulate watering cycles, and manage collective labor for constructing canals or maintaining dikes. Records from temple archives reveal that farmers tracked the lengthening and shortening of shadows throughout the year, noting the solstices and equinoxes to anticipate the flood cycle of the Nile. This precise observation ensured that seeds were sown before the waters receded too far, and that crops were harvested before the peak heat of summer threatened spoilage. But the influence of shadow measurement extended beyond agriculture. Temples, the spiritual and administrative centers of Egyptian cities, were designed with meticulous attention to solar alignment. Obelisks, sanctuary walls, and even entire temple complexes were positioned so that sunlight would illuminate statues or altars at specific moments of the year. For example, on the day of the winter solstice, sunlight would penetrate deep into the sanctum of the temple of Amun at Karnak, casting its beam on the statue of the god. Priests observed these alignments with extreme care, coordinating rituals, offerings, and festivals with celestial events. The shadows that swept across temple floors were a living clock, signaling the rhythm of religious life and reinforcing the authority of those who could interpret their meaning. Civic life, too, depended on solar and shadow observations. Markets, workshops, and public labor projects were scheduled according to the movement of the sun. Merchants opened stalls when shadows fell in particular directions, ensuring customers could see goods clearly while avoiding the oppressive midday heat. Builders and artisans monitored shadow lengths to time breaks, rotate labor, and maximize productivity. Even city administration, tax collection, canal maintenance, and census recording relied on timing derived from natural observations. The Egyptians had effectively integrated the sun into the social structure, transforming a natural phenomenon into an organizing principle that synchronized work, worship, and civic responsibilities. Training the next generation was a central component of this system. Children and apprentices learned to read shadows, observe sunlight, and track seasonal changes from a young age. Priests and scribes guided them, showing how the sun's path could predict flooding cycles, crop yields, or the timing of religious ceremonies. The lessons were repetitive, precise, and unglamorous, yet they were essential for the continuity of knowledge and the survival of the society. Families, too, internalized these rhythms, adjusting meals, work periods, and leisure according to the sun's course. Timekeeping became not a separate discipline, but an intrinsic part of daily life. The Egyptians also recognized the limitations of shadow-based measurements and developed ingenious methods to compensate. Cloudy days, dust storms, or architectural obstructions could interfere with readings, so multiple indicators were often used. Observers combined shadows with the positions of stars, the lunar cycle, and environmental cues such as temperature and river behavior. This multi-layered approach created a robust, adaptive system capable of functioning in a desert environment marked by unpredictability. It was a practical intelligence that reflected a sophisticated understanding of both natural and social systems. Moreover, shadow timekeeping reinforced social cohesion. Everyone in the community, from farmer to priest to artisan, shared a common temporal framework. Discrepancies in time reading could lead to disruptions in labor, mismanagement of irrigation, or missed religious observances. By synchronizing their actions with the predictable arc of the sun, Egyptians maintained a form of social order rooted not in coercion, but in shared knowledge and observation. Shadows became a unifying measure, aligning human activity with natural cycles and reinforcing collective responsibility. Yet even as Egyptians mastered these techniques, uncertainty remained. The solar cycle, though reliable, was not perfectly uniform. Minor variations in sunrise and sunset times, occasional eclipses, and shifts in the Nile's behavior challenged observers. The skywatchers' priests, scribes, and skilled farmers responded with meticulous record-keeping, noting anomalies and adjusting schedules for future events. This continuous feedback loop between observation and action exemplifies a society in which patience, diligence, and humility were as critical as technical skill. Interestingly, the emphasis on shadows and solar measurement also influenced Egyptian thought beyond practical concerns. The interplay of light and shadow became a metaphor for life, time, and order. Temples, tombs, and monuments often incorporated shadow play into their design, symbolizing the passage of time, the cycle of life and death, and the divine order. The same tools that guided irrigation and labor were simultaneously instruments of philosophical reflection, blending the mundane with the spiritual. By combining empirical observation with cultural, religious, and social practices, Egyptians created a civilization that endured for millennia. Their timekeeping methods, grounded in natural phenomena, demonstrated not only ingenuity but also adaptability and foresight. They laid the foundations for later advances in astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. Future civilizations, from Greek astronomers to medieval scholars, would inherit the principles developed in Egyptian shadow observatories, transforming them into more complex systems of time measurement. Yet questions lingered in the minds of the observers. Could these methods remain accurate as climate or river patterns shifted? Would future generations maintain the discipline required to observe and record shadows meticulously? And perhaps most pressing, could the delicate balance of natural observation and societal order survive in an increasingly complex civilization? These uncertainties highlighted the tension between human control and nature's unpredictability, a tension that would shape Egyptian history for centuries. The Egyptian shadow timekeepers had achieved remarkable harmony between human life and natural rhythms. Shadows were no longer accidental. They were instruments, guides, and teachers. The sun's passage dictated work, worship, and societal coordination, embedding a cosmic order into the fabric of daily life. And yet, for all the precision, the system remained grounded in observation, humility, and adaptability, a testament to human ingenuity in the absence of mechanical tools. As night approached and stars began to pierce the darkened sky, Egyptian observers would shift their gaze from the sun's disappearing light to the celestial canopy above. The patterns of stars offered additional guidance, hinting at seasonal changes yet to come and providing a new layer of temporal insight. The skywatchers understood that shadows told the story of the day, but the night sky told the story of cycles beyond immediate human control, a reminder that life, while ordered, remained intertwined with the vast and mysterious universe. As dawn painted the Nile Valley in hues of gold and rose, the intricate dance of shadows began once again. For ancient Egyptians, these shifting silhouettes were far more than fleeting images on stone and sand. They were a system of order, an instrument of survival, and a medium through which humans engaged with the divine. From farmers in the fields to priests in the temples, the measurement of time through shadows structured every facet of daily life. It was a society aligned, literally and metaphorically, with the sun. Agriculture, the backbone of Egyptian civilization, depended upon this precision. Barley and wheat fields were sown, watered, and harvested in strict accordance with solar indicators. Irrigation schedules were maintained by reading the sun's angle and shadow length, ensuring that crops received sufficient water without waste. Families, villages, and entire regions synchronized labor to the same celestial clock, creating an efficiency that allowed the civilization to thrive despite the Nile's occasional unpredictability. These routines were reinforced across generations, with children learning from parents, apprentices from masters, and scribes from priests. Shadow observation became a shared language of survival. In temples, the alignment of monuments, sanctuaries, and obelisks amplified the significance of shadows. Sunlight streaming through carefully positioned apertures illuminated sacred statues or altars at precise moments, signaling the commencement of rituals or festivals. Priests, as custodians of celestial knowledge, orchestrated these ceremonies with remarkable accuracy, blending astronomical observation with spiritual meaning. Shadows became both functional tools and symbolic guides, bridging practical timekeeping with religious and philosophical reflection. The daily march of light across stone surfaces was an invisible hand guiding devotion, labor, and civic rhythm alike. The ingenuity of Egyptian shadow timekeeping also fostered societal cohesion. Everyone from laborer to artisan to ruler shared the temporal framework dictated by the sun. Work schedules, communal projects, and religious obligations were all synchronized, minimizing conflict and ensuring efficiency. Even in the bustling marketplaces, trade and negotiation followed the rhythm of daylight, creating a subtle yet pervasive harmony. By linking human activity to a natural measure, the Egyptians anchored social order in something predictable and universally observable. Yet this system was not infallible. Clouds, dust storms, or irregular solar patterns sometimes disrupted shadow readings, while eclipses or unexpected Nile fluctuations could challenge conventional expectations. Observers responded by incorporating multiple methods: celestial markers at night, lunar cycles, environmental cues, and practical experience. This redundancy reflected an understanding that life depended on both precision and adaptability. Shadow timekeeping was therefore not merely a method, it was a philosophy, a way of engaging with a world that was structured yet unpredictable. Over generations, the meticulous observation of shadows left a lasting legacy. Egyptian scribes recorded solar movements and shadow alignments on papyrus and temple walls, producing a wealth of empirical data. These records informed mathematics, astronomy, and engineering, shaping knowledge that would influence civilizations far beyond the Nile. Greek astronomers, Hellenistic engineers, and later Islamic scholars would all build upon principles first refined in Egyptian sunlit courtyards. The humble shadows of the fields had, over centuries, become a foundation for scientific reasoning, architectural innovation, and the intellectual pursuit of understanding time itself. Perhaps the most remarkable lesson lies in the integration of the mundane and the profound. Shadows, seemingly ordinary, governed work, worship, and civic life. They taught patience and attention, emphasizing the importance of observation and continuity. They offered a tangible connection between humans and the cosmos, reminding the inhabitants of the Nile Valley that life was measured not only by deeds, but also by alignment with natural cycles. In a civilization dominated by grand monuments and monumental ambitions, it was the quiet and deliberate reading of shadows that sustained society and ensured survival. As the sun dipped below the western horizon, stretching shadows into elongated silhouettes, Egyptian observers would reflect on the day past and the patterns to come. The solar measure of time, faithful, observable, and shared, had orchestrated the labor of thousands, guided the devotion of priests, and harmonized civic activity. And yet, the night sky, with its unending stars and inscrutable motions, hinted at mysteries beyond daily reckoning. Could future generations maintain the discipline to observe shadows as carefully as their ancestors? Would the knowledge endure the changes of empire, climate, and society? And what unseen forces of the universe might yet reveal themselves to those who watched closely enough? In the end, the Egyptians' mastery of shadow and light demonstrates a remarkable truth. Civilization thrives not solely through conquest or invention, but through patient observation, careful record-keeping, and adaptation to the natural world. The sun governed life, shadows structured work and ritual, and the attentive eyes of humans turned what might have been ordinary phenomena into a system of extraordinary order. The Egyptian shadow timekeepers left a legacy written in stone and sunlight, a testament to humanity's ability to find rhythm, meaning, and continuity in the silent, predictable sweep of light across the land. Their story reminds us, even today, that survival and civilization often depend on noticing the ordinary, interpreting patterns patiently, and respecting the natural cycles that surround us. It is a quiet triumph, a civilization guided not by mechanized time, but by the enduring measure of the sun. Story 3: The Farmers of the Yellow River. Long before the invention of mechanical clocks or standardized calendars, life along China's Yellow River was governed by two forces: the river's unpredictable floods and the patterns of the sky. For early farmers inhabiting the fertile Les Plains, survival depended on understanding the rhythms of both water and light. Crops, homes, and even social structures were dictated by subtle signs in the natural world: the height of the river, the first shoots of millet, the appearance of certain stars at dusk, and the shifting position of the sun. In this landscape, the sky was more than a backdrop. It was the primary instrument for measuring time and ensuring survival. The Yellow River, or Huanghe, was both a giver and taker of life. Its seasonal floods deposited nutrient-rich silt that allowed grains to flourish, but they could also destroy fields, homes, and entire villages. Farmers quickly realized that predicting the river's behavior was as critical as observing celestial patterns. By correlating the sun's position, the lengthening of shadows, and the first visible stars of spring and autumn, these early cultivators developed practical calendars entirely grounded in observation. Knowledge of the sky was intertwined with knowledge of the land, and both were passed down through generations as oral instruction, ritual, and apprenticeship. Daily life revolved around this temporal awareness. At dawn, farmers rose to inspect fields, checking soil moisture, growth stages of crops, and the riverbanks for signs of impending flooding. Irrigation channels, often dug painstakingly by hand, were opened and closed according to patterns dictated by the sun's height and the timing of seasonal floods. Shadows cast by poles and trees helped divide the day into periods of labor, morning tilling, midday rest, and afternoon harvesting or maintenance work. In essence, the length and direction of shadows became a living clock for thousands of families, orchestrating the most mundane and essential tasks of life. Observing the sky also informed agricultural decision-making on a seasonal scale. The first appearance of specific constellations at twilight signaled the start of planting season. The heliacal rising of Venus, or the moon, guided expectations for rainfall. Farmers could anticipate drought or flood by combining long-term observation of celestial patterns with empirical knowledge of river behavior. These techniques required meticulous attention. A misjudged planting period could result in famine, while a poorly timed harvest could squander months of labor. The survival of entire communities depended on the accurate reading of these natural cues. Beyond practical work, the sky structured social and spiritual life. Rituals were designed to honor the forces governing both river and sky, often invoking deities believed to control water, fertility, and celestial movements. Ceremonies were performed at specific times of day, coordinated by observing shadow lengths or the rising sun. Such practices were not only expressions of belief, they served to synchronize communities, reinforcing cooperation and shared understanding. In effect, the Skywatcher's priests, village elders, and seasoned farmers acted as both scientists and cultural leaders, translating natural observations into instructions for survival and community cohesion. The transmission of knowledge was vital. Young apprentices learned to recognize subtle changes in the environment, to track lunar and solar cycles, and to correlate these observations with agricultural tasks. They were taught to measure shadows, note the timing of sunrise and sunset, and memorize the positions of key stars through the year. The skills required patience, attention, and repetition, embedding temporal awareness into everyday life. In this way, even children became participants in the careful balance between human activity and cosmic order. Remarkably, the farmers of the Yellow River adapted their observational practices to the river's notorious unpredictability. Floods did not always arrive on schedule, stars could be obscured by clouds, and seasonal shifts were not always consistent. To mitigate uncertainty, they developed flexible methods. Multiple celestial markers were used in combination, empirical rules based on prior floods guided decisions, and communal consultation allowed for collective judgment when observations conflicted. Their system was not rigid. It was resilient, adaptive, and deeply practical. The relationship between sky and river was more than a survival strategy, it shaped the rhythm of society itself. Labor, markets, religious ceremonies, and family life were all orchestrated according to the ebb and flow of natural cycles. Farmers organized planting and harvesting collectively, guided by the shared understanding of celestial patterns. Festivals and communal gatherings were scheduled around the sun's position or significant stellar events, embedding cosmic awareness into social norms. In a sense, the Yellow River community functioned as a living calendar, its members walking in step with the rhythms of both land and sky. Even as the farmers perfected these techniques, questions persisted. Could this knowledge withstand climate variability or unexpected flooding? Would young generations maintain the careful observation required to sustain their livelihoods? And more subtly, what mysteries of the sky and river remained unseen, waiting for someone patient enough to notice them? These uncertainties defined life along the Yellow River, reminding every observer that survival depended not only on skill, but on humility before forces greater than oneself. In this landscape, the ordinary became extraordinary. Simple tools, careful observation, and daily attention to shadows and stars created a system that allowed communities to thrive in a challenging environment. Life was measured not by mechanical devices or abstract calendars, but by the intimate dialogue between humans and nature, the predictable arc of the sun, the appearance of constellations, and the ever-shifting river. For the farmers of the Yellow River, time was not a concept to be recorded on paper. It was a living, breathing rhythm that structured every aspect of life. And yet, even with centuries of accumulated knowledge, the farmers could never fully master the river or the sky. Each season brought surprises, each observation hinted at deeper patterns, and each generation faced the challenge of interpreting signs anew. How could they anticipate the unexpected? Could they encode their understanding in ways that survived the centuries? What hidden knowledge of river, sky, and human behavior remained to be discovered? It is here, at this intersection of observation, survival, and uncertainty, that the story pauses, ready to explore how these practices evolved into organized systems of ritual, social coordination, and early science in Section 2. Life along the Yellow River was a constant negotiation between human endeavor and the forces of nature. The river brought both nourishment and destruction. The sun offered predictable light, yet shifted subtly through the seasons, and the stars rose and fell with a constancy that seemed reliable, yet hid complexities that only careful observation could reveal. For early Chinese farmers, survival depended on interpreting these signals correctly, and on embedding that knowledge into the rhythms of community life. Agricultural tasks were the primary driver of timekeeping. Farmers monitored the flow of the river, watching for early signs of rising water or receding floodplains. They combined these observations with the position of the sun and moon, using the changing shadows to mark hours of labor, rest, and irrigation. Labor was divided carefully. Men and women coordinated planting and watering schedules, and entire families would synchronize their tasks according to daylight, seasonal shifts, and the anticipated flood cycles. A miscalculation could have devastating consequences, and as a result, practical observation became a communal skill as essential as plowing or harvesting. Over time, these observations gave rise to ritualized practices. Farmers held ceremonies at the start and end of planting seasons, offering prayers to river deities and celestial forces. These rituals were more than symbolic; they provided a framework for collective coordination. If the appearance of a particular star indicated that planting season had begun, the ritual reinforced the timing, ensuring that the community acted in concert. Similarly, festivals marking the lunar cycles encouraged collective labor breaks, communal meals, and social cohesion, weaving the measurement of time into both survival and culture. The transmission of knowledge was formalized in simple but effective ways. Village elders and skilled farmers trained apprentices in both practical skills and observational techniques. They taught them to measure the length of shadows using sticks, track the movement of celestial bodies, and correlate these signs with seasonal river behavior. Over generations, this knowledge accumulated into a shared oral and experiential archive, allowing communities to maintain stability despite environmental variability. Children learned to read the sky as naturally as they learned to plant millet or harvest barley, integrating temporal awareness into daily life. The Yellow River's unpredictability demanded that timekeeping be flexible. Floods did not always follow the same patterns. Cloud cover obscured celestial markers, and seasonal shifts could confuse even experienced observers. To compensate, farmers and elders developed redundancy. Multiple celestial and environmental indicators were used in combination, and practical experience was valued alongside formal observation. This approach fostered a kind of adaptive intelligence and understanding that order existed in nature. But human success depended on careful interpretation, patience, and readiness to respond to anomalies. In addition to agriculture, celestial observation played a role in early scientific inquiry. Records of floods, star positions, and seasonal changes were maintained by scribes or elders, who sought patterns across years. By comparing observations, they developed rudimentary predictive systems, noticing correlations between lunar cycles, solar positions, and river behavior. While these systems were primarily pragmatic, designed to guide planting and harvest, they represent one of humanity's earliest experiments in empirical reasoning, observing nature, recording it systematically, and attempting to forecast future events. Such practices laid the foundation for the sophisticated astronomical and mathematical traditions that would later emerge in China. Social organization was also deeply influenced by this temporal knowledge. Labor was coordinated not solely by necessity, but by an understanding of shared rhythms. Irrigation schedules required cooperation across extended communities, as water diverted for one field affected downstream plots. Festivals, rituals, and labor rotations were scheduled according to celestial and environmental cues, creating cohesion and reducing conflict. The skywatchers, the farmers, elders, and ritual specialists served as both guides and mediators, interpreting natural signs and ensuring the community operated in harmony with the river and the sky. Interestingly, the observation of celestial bodies influenced not just practical life, but also the philosophical imagination. The movements of the sun, moon, and stars became metaphors for cycles of life, growth, and change. Farmers, watching shadows lengthen and stars rise, developed a sense of time that was circular rather than linear. Seasons returned, rivers flooded and receded, and generations followed one another in patterns mirrored by the heavens. Even as they struggled with uncertainty, this perspective fostered resilience and a deep sense of connection between human activity and the cosmos. Yet challenges remained. The river could defy predictions, stars might be obscured, and drought or excessive flooding could disrupt carefully maintained schedules. Every year brought new variables to observe, interpret, and adapt to. The survival of communities depended on both fidelity to accumulated knowledge and flexibility to respond to the unexpected. Each observation, each record, each ritual became a small thread in a larger tapestry of resilience, a testament to the farmer's ability to harmonize human action with natural cycles. By integrating observation, ritual, and practical labor, the communities along the Yellow River created a society remarkably adept at managing uncertainty. They developed a temporal infrastructure rooted in natural phenomena, ensuring that agriculture, social organization, and religious practice all functioned in concert. The sun, moon, stars, and river became instruments not only of survival, but of cultural continuity, enabling communities to thrive in an environment both generous and capricious. And yet, the story of the Yellow River farmers remained unfinished. Could their methods withstand centuries of environmental change? Would the careful observations and rituals continue to guide future generations as they had the past? Could humanity ever fully master the interplay of river, sky, and soil? These questions, unresolved and pressing, hint at both the ingenuity and the fragility of a society built entirely on observation, adaptation, and rhythm with nature. It is here, on the floodplain under the watchful sky, that the narrative pauses poised to explore in Section 3 how these practices culminated in the resilience, ingenuity, and long-term legacy of Yellow River civilization. The sun rose again over the Les plains of the Yellow River, casting its warm light over fields of millet, wheat, and sorghum. For the farmers who had learned to live in harmony with both sky and river, this daily illumination was more than natural beauty. It was a guide, a clock, and a teacher. Their lives, interwoven with the movement of the sun, the stars, and the river itself, reflected centuries of accumulated wisdom, observation, and adaptation. Agriculture, the foundation of life along the Yellow River, had become a science of observation. Farmers knew the optimal timing for planting and harvest not through rigid schedules, but through the careful reading of shadows, sun angles, and celestial markers. Irrigation systems were managed with precision, distributing water fairly and efficiently across fields that stretched along the floodplain. Labor was coordinated in households and communities, balancing human effort with environmental demands. Even in a landscape known for unpredictability, these systems allowed society to endure and thrive. Rituals and social practices reinforced this alignment with natural cycles. Seasonal ceremonies, often tied to the first appearances of key stars or the shifting sun, served multiple purposes. They marked time, coordinated communal labor, and strengthened social cohesion. Religious leaders and village elders acted as mediators, interpreting natural signs to ensure that everyone from laborers in the fields to artisans in workshops acted in harmony with the environment. In this way, observation of sky and river was embedded in culture, creating a rhythm that shaped both survival and society. The careful record-keeping and observation also laid the groundwork for early science. Farmers and scribes noted patterns of flooding, lunar cycles, and stellar positions, seeking correlations that could guide future action. These observations were empirical, grounded in direct experience, and increasingly refined over generations. While primarily practical, this accumulation of knowledge represents some of humanity's earliest systematic attempts to understand natural cycles, laying a foundation for the sophisticated astronomical and mathematical traditions that would flourish in China in later centuries. What stands out is the resilience of this system. The Yellow River was notoriously unpredictable. Floods could arrive early or late, sometimes with catastrophic consequences. The climate varied from year to year, and celestial observations were occasionally obscured by clouds or storms. Yet the farmers' methods were adaptive, integrating multiple indicators and relying on both individual skill and communal knowledge. Patience, humility, and persistent observation allowed communities to survive and maintain continuity even in the face of uncertainty. They had created not only a method for survival but a philosophy. That careful attention, shared knowledge, and respect for natural rhythms were central to enduring human life. The legacy of these farmers is subtle but profound. Their methods illustrate the intimate connection between humans and their environment, a connection that was both practical and philosophical. Observing shadows, tracking the stars, and anticipating the river's floods taught early Chinese societies to measure, predict, and adapt a form of intelligence born from necessity. These practices influenced later dynasties, providing the empirical foundation for more formalized calendars, astronomical observations, and agricultural planning. The rhythms established along the Yellow River became part of the cultural DNA of Chinese civilization. Yet, even with centuries of careful observation, questions remained unanswered. How could knowledge of the river, sky, and crops persist through generations of upheaval and change? Could future observers maintain the discipline and patience required to interpret these natural signs accurately? What other patterns, subtle or hidden, awaited discovery for those attentive enough to notice them? These questions remind us that even in systems of remarkable ingenuity, uncertainty is never fully eliminated. Human societies are always learning, adapting, and negotiating with forces greater than themselves. Ultimately, the farmers of the Yellow River demonstrate a fundamental truth about civilization. It is built not only through grand achievements or monumental constructions, but also through the steady, patient attention to ordinary patterns in nature. Shadows, stars, and rivers became instruments of survival, governance, and culture. They enabled communities to thrive in challenging environments, ensured the continuity of knowledge across generations, and nurtured a worldview in which humans were both observers and participants in the greater rhythms of the world. As the sun dipped below the horizon, elongating shadows across the fertile plains, the farmer's day ended as it had for generations, marked, measured, and guided by the natural cycles that had shaped their lives. And yet, the story of observation and adaptation continued. Every shadow cast, every star tracked, and every flood survived became part of a living tradition of resilience and ingenuity. In this quiet, persistent engagement with nature, the farmers of the Yellow River left a legacy that extends far beyond their fields, a testament to humanity's capacity to understand, adapt, and harmonize with the forces of the world. Story 4. Medieval Monks and the Candle Clock. In the quiet, stone corridors of medieval monasteries, life moved to a rhythm dictated not by the external world but by the measured passage of light and sound. Monks in Benedictine abbeys and other religious communities observed a strict schedule: prayers at fixed hours, work in the scriptorium, meals in silence, and periods of rest, all meticulously timed. Yet in a world without mechanical clocks, the measurement of time relied on humble and ingenious methods: candles, water, and the ringing of bells. The candle clock, one of the most common tools of the medieval monastery, was simple yet precise. A tall, thick candle, often marked at intervals along its length, would burn at a predictable rate, with each mark indicating an hour or half hour. As the flame descended, monks could estimate the passage of time. Some candles were embedded with metal inserts that would fall into a dish when a specific interval elapsed, producing a small sound, a primitive alarm system that signaled the next prayer or task. The candles themselves became instruments of both daily discipline and spiritual reflection, their slow, steady burning mirroring the measured cadence of monastic life. Water clocks, or clepsydras, provided another method for tracking time, especially at night or in periods of low light. Water would drip at a consistent rate into a marked vessel, with levels indicating the passage of hours. Though susceptible to temperature and evaporation, these devices were valued for their reliability over short intervals and were often used to regulate communal activities, such as meal times, study sessions, and nighttime vigils. In combination with bells and candle clocks, they formed a layered system that allowed monks to live in temporal harmony, even without modern clocks. Bells played a critical role in this temporal orchestration. High in the monastery tower, a bell would ring at precise intervals to signal canonical hours: matins in the early pre-dawn darkness, lauds at sunrise, prime mid-morning, terce, sext, and none through the day, vespers at sunset, and compline at night. The sound carried across cloisters, gardens, and work areas, guiding both monastic and lay workers on the estate. Bells were not merely functional. They were symbols of temporal and spiritual order, audible markers of the rhythm of sacred life. Daily life in the monastery depended on this network of timekeeping methods. Monks rose in the dim hours of night, their footsteps quiet on cold stone floors, attending prayers guided by faint candlelight. They copied manuscripts in the scriptorium, laboring with care to preserve sacred texts. Meals were taken in silence, measured by the progression of time signaled by candles or bells. Work in the gardens, kitchens, or workshops was similarly orchestrated, each task framed within the structured temporal framework of monastic discipline. The precision of these methods required vigilance. Candle clocks burned unevenly if drafts affected the flame, water clocks were sensitive to seasonal temperature changes, and bells required careful maintenance to ring at the proper intervals. The monks developed routines to calibrate their instruments, trimming wicks, cleaning clepsydras, and checking the alignment of bells. In doing so, they demonstrated an extraordinary attention to detail, transforming simple materials into reliable tools for structuring communal life. This temporal structure was inseparable from the spiritual philosophy of the monastery. Time itself was sacred, a gift from God to be measured and sanctified through ritual. Each canonical hour provided an opportunity for prayer, reflection, and discipline. The monotony of repetitive labor, silent meals, and nightly vigils was not arbitrary. It was the embodiment of spiritual rhythm, connecting human action to divine order. Observing time, therefore, became a form of devotion, and the tools of measurement, candles, water, and bells were extensions of this practice. Apprentices and novices were carefully trained in the use of these timekeeping methods. They learned to interpret the progress of a candle's flame, estimate intervals by water flow, and respond promptly to the ringing of bells. Through repetition, attention, and guidance from senior monks, they internalized the temporal rhythm of the monastery, developing a sense of time both practical and spiritual. The monastery functioned as a living clock, with each member contributing to the accuracy and continuity of communal life. Yet for all its discipline, the system was not infallible. Candles could burn too quickly, clepsydras could freeze or evaporate, and bells could fail. Human error and environmental factors imposed limits on precision, reminding monks that even in a life devoted to order, uncertainty persisted. Their reliance on observation, adjustment, and collective vigilance reflected both ingenuity and humility, recognizing that time, while measurable, was also a force beyond complete human control. The story of candle clocks and monastic bells illustrates a broader truth. Human societies have always sought to organize life in accordance with natural and social rhythms. The medieval monks of Europe created a system that combined simple materials, careful observation, and communal coordination to measure hours, regulate labor, and sanctify spiritual practice. It was an approach that was both practical and deeply reflective, integrating survival, productivity, and devotion. And yet, questions remained for these observant communities. Could such methods endure through generations of change? Would novices maintain the careful attention required to preserve temporal order? And what innovations might arise to make the measurement of time more precise, more reliable, and more responsive to the needs of a growing and complex world? It is here, in the quiet corridors lit by flickering candles and echoed by the tolling of bells, that the story pauses, poised to explore in Section 2 how monastic timekeeping evolved, influenced society, and laid the foundation for more precise methods of measuring hours and days. Life in a medieval monastery was a careful orchestration of labor, prayer, and study, all guided by a combination of candles, bells, and water clocks. By the 11th and 12th centuries, monasteries across Europe had developed systems of remarkable sophistication, integrating multiple timekeeping methods to ensure the smooth functioning of daily routines. For the monks, precision was not merely practical, it was sacred, a tangible reflection of the order of God and the harmony of creation. Candle clocks, once simple sticks of wax with evenly spaced markings, became increasingly sophisticated. Some were carefully manufactured to burn at predictable rates, with embedded metal threads or small weights that would fall and ring a bell when an hour elapsed. This innovation transformed the silent, invisible passage of time into an audible signal, reminding monks to rise, pray, or move between tasks. Candles were often supplemented with incremental marks indicating half hours or even quarter hours, providing a level of granularity that allowed for fine control over both communal and individual schedules. Water clocks, too, were refined during this period. Monks experimented with different vessel shapes, adjusting the flow of water to compensate for temperature fluctuations or evaporation. Some clepsydras included floating indicators or small mechanical devices to enhance accuracy, transforming the simple dripping of water into a semi-automated measure of time. These tools were particularly useful at night or in the depths of winter, when limited light rendered candle clocks less reliable. Together, water and candle clocks formed a layered system, ensuring continuity even when one method was disrupted. The ringing of bells remained central to monastic life. Towers were strategically located so that the sound would carry throughout the cloisters, gardens, workshops, and refectories. Bells marked canonical hours matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline, but they also regulated labor, signaling when fieldwork or scriptorium tasks should begin or end. The rhythm of bells structured not only spiritual life, but the practical functioning of the monastery as an economic and agricultural enterprise. Through the combination of visual, auditory, and mechanical cues, monks achieved a level of coordination that was unprecedented in European society at the time. Monastic observance of time also served as a training ground for careful measurement and record-keeping. Novices were instructed to monitor candles, water flow, and the timing of bell tolls with precision. Every error or discrepancy was noted and corrected, creating a culture in which observation, adjustment, and careful documentation were valued. These skills, developed initially to maintain spiritual discipline, would have broader applications, influencing later scientific inquiry and technological development in Europe. The monastery, in this sense, was not only a place of religious devotion, but also a center for early experimentation with measurement and accuracy. Beyond the walls of the monastery, these innovations influenced the surrounding society. Lay workers, peasants, and artisans often coordinated their activities with monastic schedules. Markets opened and closed around canonical hours. Agricultural labor aligned with communal work periods. Festivals and religious celebrations were synchronized with the tolling of bells. In rural regions where mechanical clocks were rare, monastic timekeeping established a temporal framework for the broader community, extending the influence of these techniques far beyond the cloistered walls. The interplay of ritual and practicality also shaped the intellectual culture of the monastery. Monks came to view time itself as a reflection of divine order. Precision in measurement was both a spiritual and a pragmatic pursuit, a way of harmonizing human activity with the perceived structure of creation. Each candle burned with purpose, each drop of water marked progress, and each toll of a bell connected human life to cycles both natural and sacred. This integration of observation, labor, and devotion exemplifies a broader medieval understanding that spiritual discipline and worldly necessity were inseparable, and that careful attention to ordinary details could become an act of worship. Despite these innovations, uncertainty persisted. Candles could burn too quickly or unevenly, water clocks could fail in freezing temperatures, and bell towers required ongoing maintenance. Human error and environmental variation reminded monks that even the most disciplined system could not fully overcome the unpredictability of the world. To manage this, monasteries developed redundancy and oversight. Multiple clocks, overlapping schedules, and communal vigilance ensured that daily life proceeded with minimal disruption. The need for constant attention reinforced lessons of humility and patience, qualities as essential to survival as to spiritual growth. Perhaps most significantly, monastic timekeeping laid the foundation for the later proliferation of mechanical clocks. The precision, discipline, and observational skills honed within monasteries created a culture prepared to adopt and refine new technologies. By observing, recording, and responding to the natural and artificial measures of time, monks contributed indirectly to the eventual development of public clocks in towns and cities, transforming the way societies measured and organized life. Yet questions remained even for these diligent observers. How could timekeeping evolve to accommodate growing complexity in society? Could the precision achieved within cloisters be scaled to entire towns, kingdoms, and trade networks? And how would future generations balance the spiritual and practical dimensions of time in a world increasingly dependent on mechanical measurement? The challenges of accuracy, continuity, and societal integration remained unresolved, hinting at the innovations yet to come. In this way, medieval monasteries were crucibles of temporal discipline. Through candles, water, and bells, monks structured their lives, coordinated communal labor, and created a rhythm that extended beyond their walls. They demonstrated that even in a world without mechanical clocks, human ingenuity, careful observation, and shared practices could measure and regulate time effectively. And in doing so, they laid the groundwork for a society in which precise measurement of hours would become both a practical necessity and a cultural hallmark. As the sun set over the European countryside, the walls of monasteries glowed with the flickering light of countless candles. Within these stone cloisters, life was measured in wax and flame, in the drip of water, and in the toll of iron bells. Monks moved with quiet precision, attending prayers, copying manuscripts, tending gardens, or performing crafts, all according to the intricate temporal framework they had constructed. In a world without mechanical clocks, the monastery functioned as a living chronometer, where human observation and simple tools transformed ordinary materials into instruments of order. Candles, though humble, became symbols of time itself. A single wax stick, marked at regular intervals, could govern hours of labor, prayer, and rest. Its slow burn mirrored the measured rhythm of life, and its predictability allowed communities to coordinate complex daily routines. Bells amplified this rhythm, carrying temporal cues across courtyards, workshops, and gardens, while water clocks provided continuous measurement in darkness or during overcast days. Together, these methods created a multi-layered system that ensured both spiritual devotion and practical efficiency. Monastic attention to detail transformed timekeeping into both art and science. Novices learned to calibrate candles, monitor water flow, and maintain bell mechanisms. Every miscalculation required correction. Every deviation became a lesson in observation and precision. Over generations, this careful discipline embedded a profound temporal literacy within monastic culture. The monks' focus on accuracy and repetition was not just functional. It cultivated patience, attention, and humility, qualities essential to both spiritual life and practical survival in a medieval world of uncertainty. Beyond the monastery, the influence of these timekeeping practices extended into broader society. Villagers and workers structured their labor around monastic bells, markets opened and closed in rhythm with canonical hours, and agricultural tasks were coordinated with periods of rest dictated by the monastery's schedule. Monasteries became centers of temporal authority, establishing shared frameworks for coordinating labor, worship, and social life. The disciplined observation of time within cloisters quietly shaped the daily rhythms of entire regions. The innovations of candle clocks and water clocks also set the stage for later technological advances. By perfecting careful measurement, redundancy, and observation, monks prepared society to adopt mechanical clocks, which would gradually appear in town squares and cathedrals across Europe. The meticulous skills honed in cloisters recording, adjusting, and refining temporal measurements created the intellectual and practical foundation for more precise, widespread timekeeping. Without the patient, incremental work of these religious communities, the leap to mechanical clocks might have been far slower and less reliable. Even as precision improved, uncertainty remained a constant companion. Candles burned unevenly, water clocks could fail, and bells required careful maintenance. Environmental factors, human error, and seasonal variations challenged every method. Monks embraced this uncertainty, understanding that measurement required vigilance, correction, and humility. Time was both measurable and mysterious, a gift from God, a tool for survival, and a structure for community life. In recognizing its limits, they created systems resilient enough to endure through centuries of change. The story of monastic timekeeping demonstrates the quiet power of ordinary attention. Simple tools, repeated observations, and careful calibration allowed a community to synchronize daily life with extraordinary precision, long before the advent of gears, springs, or pendulums. In doing so, monks shaped not only their own lives but the rhythm of surrounding society, leaving a legacy that influenced science, technology, and the organization of human labor for generations to come. Yet questions lingered even within these cloisters. Could the methods perfected by monks be adapted for towns, trade, and secular life? How would future generations balance the practical and spiritual dimensions of time in an increasingly complex world? And what unforeseen innovations might arise to further refine humanity's measurement of hours and minutes? These uncertainties, like the slow burn of a candle, illuminated both the limits of human ingenuity and the promise of careful, sustained observation. Ultimately, the medieval monks' mastery of flame, water, and sound was more than a practical achievement. It was a reflection of human ingenuity, discipline, and the desire to harmonize with the rhythms of life. In quiet cloisters, time became a tangible, measured force guiding labor, devotion, and learning. The candle burned steadily, the water dripped predictably, the bell tolled faithfully, and through it all, human life moved in careful, measured steps. The legacy of these monastic observers endures today in the very way societies perceive, measure, and structure time, a testament to the extraordinary impact of ordinary, patient attention. Story 5. Incan Sun Temples and Timekeeping. High in the rugged Andes, where peaks pierce the sky and valleys wind like ribbons of stone, the Inca civilization thrived for centuries, guided by a profound understanding of the sun and its movements. For the people of Tawantinsuyu, the four-part Inca Empire time was not measured by clocks or mechanical devices, but by the predictable path of light, the shadow cast by structures, and the alignment of temples with celestial events. Every day, every season, and every ritual was orchestrated by observation, blending practical survival with spiritual devotion. At the heart of Inca timekeeping were the sun temples, or Intihuatanas, whose very name means hitching post of the sun. These stone structures were meticulously aligned to track solstices and equinoxes, casting shadows that moved across carved markers in predictable patterns. Observers could determine the longest and shortest days of the year, anticipate seasonal changes, and schedule agricultural and ceremonial activities with remarkable accuracy. The sun, rising and setting over the jagged peaks, became a reliable arbiter of time, linking human labor with the rhythms of the cosmos. The Inca relied on these observations for both spiritual and practical purposes. Agriculture, the foundation of the empire, demanded careful timing. Planting and harvesting in high-altitude regions required awareness of frost cycles, rainfall patterns, and solar exposure. By monitoring the sun's position and the shadows it cast, farmers could determine the optimal periods for sowing potatoes, maize, and quinoa. Communities relied on coordinated observation. One valley's shadow pattern could inform timing in another, creating a shared temporal framework across vast and varied terrain. Daily life in Incan cities and settlements was synchronized with sunlight. Work in terraces, workshops, and fields followed the sun's arc, with shadows indicating breaks, meal times, and communal gatherings. Priests and astronomer-obsessive specialists observed the sun's journey meticulously, interpreting shadow patterns on stones and temple walls to guide not only agriculture but festivals, rituals, and civic activities. These observations ensured that societal functions, from crop planning to religious observance, proceeded in harmony with natural cycles, a crucial factor in a civilization spread across mountains, valleys, and deserts. The Intihuatana stones themselves were marvels of precision. Carved from granite, polished, and set with careful orientation, they captured sunlight at key moments of the year. During the summer solstice, for example, shadows aligned in precise formations, marking the start of ceremonies honoring Inti, the sun god. These events were more than spiritual spectacles. They coordinated the labor and movement of thousands, signaling planting seasons, harvests, and festivals. The shadow patterns on Intihuatanas were, in essence, public timekeepers, communicating temporal information across communities without the need for spoken orders or written calendars. In addition to sun temples, Inca astronomers used observation posts atop peaks and terraces to track not only the sun, but also the moon, stars, and planetary movements. Certain constellations were associated with agricultural cycles, and the appearance of Venus or the Pleiades indicated the timing of rituals or sowing. Observation was precise, painstaking, and collective. Multiple observers corroborated measurements, recorded patterns, and transmitted knowledge to leaders and priests. Over generations, this practice created a sophisticated system of empirical astronomy embedded in daily life, connecting human survival with celestial rhythms. The integration of astronomy with social order was central to Incan society. Festivals, labor rotations, and state projects were scheduled in alignment with solar observations, ensuring efficiency and cohesion across a sprawling empire. Observing shadows and solar positions allowed leaders to coordinate massive infrastructure projects, terraces, roads, and aqueducts across mountains and valleys. In a civilization where communication could be slow and challenging, the predictable rhythm of the sun became a unifying temporal reference, linking disparate communities through shared cosmic awareness. Yet the system demanded vigilance and adaptability. Cloud cover, snowstorms, and seasonal variability could obscure observations, requiring judgment, redundancy, and careful recording. Priests and observers developed methods for confirming measurements, cross-referencing the sun's position with seasonal changes, river levels, and local weather patterns. These practices were as much about survival and coordination as they were about devotion, demonstrating the Incas' ability to integrate empirical observation with social and spiritual governance. The life of the Inca was thus structured by light and shadow. Every task, from planting terraces to conducting ceremonies, was embedded within a temporal framework defined by celestial movement. Ordinary people internalized these rhythms from childhood, learning to anticipate seasonal changes, understand shadow lengths, and participate in rituals with precise timing. Timekeeping was communal, experiential, and intertwined with survival, devotion, and societal cohesion. Yet questions lingered even in this highly organized society. Could shadow-based observation endure across generations as the empire expanded? How could observers account for anomalies in weather or solar movement at high altitudes? And what hidden knowledge of the cosmos remained, waiting for someone patient enough to track it? The Inca had mastered the practical use of shadows and sunlight, yet the universe always offered mysteries beyond immediate observation. It is here, on the sun-drenched terraces of the Andes and in the sacred Intihuatanas of high temples, that the story pauses, poised to explore in Section 2 how these astronomical observations influenced Incan agriculture, rituals, and governance. In the high Andes, where jagged peaks pierce clouds and valleys descend into rivers of stone, life depended on careful observation. For the Inca, survival was not a matter of luck. It was the result of a disciplined understanding of the sun, its shadows, and the patterns of the heavens. Their temples, terraces, and villages were all oriented to the sun's path, transforming natural phenomena into practical, societal, and spiritual instruments. Agriculture, the backbone of the empire, relied on these precise observations. The terraces carved into mountain slopes were marvels of engineering, each designed to capture optimal sunlight and protect crops from frost. Farmers knew when to plant maize, potatoes, quinoa, and other staples by observing the length of shadows and the rising positions of the sun. The solstices and equinoxes, carefully recorded by priests at Intihuatanas, dictated not only ritual ceremonies but the timing of essential agricultural tasks. A misstep could mean frost damage or a failed harvest, threatening entire communities. The sun's daily and seasonal movements became the ultimate guide, linking cosmic order with human labor. This solar awareness extended into ritual and religious life. Festivals honoring Inti, the sun god, were scheduled with exacting attention to shadow alignment. During the summer solstice, for example, sunlight would strike specific carvings or altar surfaces, signaling the start of ceremonies that could involve thousands of participants. These rituals were not merely spiritual observances. They coordinated labor cycles, trade schedules, and military mobilization. The sun's predictable journey became a social organizer, ensuring that work, worship, and civic life proceeded in synchrony across the empire. Incan priests, trained as astronomers, were the custodians of this knowledge. They observed the sun, moon, and stars from sacred sites and mountain peaks, cross-referencing shadow lengths, celestial positions, and seasonal patterns. Their meticulous records enabled the empire to plan agricultural output, organize labor for massive construction projects, and maintain social cohesion across diverse ecological zones. For example, the timing of river irrigation, road construction, and food storage relied on these observations. The priests' work blended empirical measurement with spiritual authority. Reading the heavens was both a scientific and political act. Beyond agriculture and ritual, solar observation reinforced political power. The sun was a symbol of divine authority. Rulers claimed to be descended from Inti, and by interpreting celestial signs correctly, priests validated the leadership of the Sapa Inca. Shadow measurements and sun alignments became instruments of legitimacy, linking natural order with imperial control. Villages, terraces, and temples across thousands of square kilometers operated on a coordinated temporal system, allowing the central authority to mobilize resources efficiently. The sun was not only a source of light and warmth, it was a unifying framework for governance. Daily life for ordinary citizens was intimately tied to these solar cycles. Villagers rose with the sun, organized labor around its passage, and participated in communal activities signaled by shadows or the priestly interpretation of celestial events. Even children learned to anticipate seasonal changes and ritual schedules by observing the sun's behavior. Timekeeping was not abstract. It was a lived experience, inseparable from the rhythms of work, worship, and survival. This experiential knowledge ensured continuity and cohesion, enabling the empire to function with remarkable efficiency, despite its vast and rugged territory. The Inca also developed redundancy to manage uncertainty. Clouds, snow, or fog could obscure the sun, while high-altitude weather remained unpredictable. Observers relied on multiple methods, comparing shadow lengths with star positions, monitoring lunar cycles, and consulting environmental cues such as frost, river levels, or flowering patterns. This adaptive approach reflected a sophisticated understanding of both natural variability and human limitations. Observation was not passive, it was active, repeated, and communal, reinforcing both practical and social stability. Yet, even with precision and careful recording, questions remained. Could the knowledge of solar alignment and shadow measurement persist through generational change? How could observers anticipate rare anomalies, such as unseasonable frost or prolonged cloud cover? And what aspects of the cosmos, subtle or hidden, remained invisible even to the most diligent priest astronomers? These uncertainties reminded the Inca that while the sun could guide human activity, it could not eliminate all risk. Adaptation, observation, and communal coordination remained essential for survival. In the interplay of shadow and stone, the Inca demonstrated a remarkable integration of practical ingenuity, spiritual devotion, and governance. By aligning temples, terraces, and villages with the sun, they created a society in which cosmic and earthly order were inseparable. Shadows on Intihuatanas communicated agricultural timing, organized labor, and signaled rituals, while priests interpreted these signs to maintain political and social cohesion. The Andes became a landscape of solar literacy, where ordinary life and imperial administration were measured in light, shadow, and careful observation. As the sun dipped behind the mountains and elongated the shadows on terraces and temple walls, the Inca knew that each day's observation contributed to the collective knowledge of their civilization. Yet mysteries persisted. How to predict irregular weather patterns, how to transmit knowledge accurately across generations, and what further insights might be revealed by patient observation of the heavens. It is in these unanswered questions, the tension between knowledge and uncertainty, that the ingenuity and resilience of Incan timekeeping is most evident. As dawn broke over the Andean peaks, sunlight spilled across terraces, temples, and villages, revealing a civilization meticulously attuned to the movements of the sky. For the Inca, the rising and setting of the sun was more than a daily spectacle. It was the framework upon which society, agriculture, and governance depended. The Intihuatanas carved with precision and oriented to capture the sun's rays at critical moments served as living clocks, translating celestial phenomena into practical and spiritual guidance. The empire's reliance on shadow and light demonstrates the Incas' remarkable ability to blend observation with application. Farmers scheduled planting and harvesting according to solar markers, ensuring crops could survive the unpredictable high-altitude climate. Priests read the sun's position to guide rituals and festivals, while rulers used celestial signs to legitimize political authority. Shadows on sacred stones were interpreted as both practical signals and divine messages, a fusion of science, devotion, and governance that allowed an empire spanning thousands of kilometers to function coherently. The precision of Incan solar observation extended into infrastructure and labor management. Terraces, aqueducts, and roads were constructed with consideration of solar angles, frost exposure, and seasonal cycles. Workforces were mobilized in coordination with solar markers, and storage facilities for food were timed to ensure adequate reserves. In essence, the empire's survival was literally measured in shadows. A carefully aligned rock or temple wall could determine when thousands of people planted, harvested, or celebrated. The sun, and the shadows it cast, became instruments of order across society. Yet the Inca understood the limitations of observation. Weather in the high Andes was unpredictable. Fog, snow, and clouds could obscure the sun, and rare climatic anomalies could threaten crops. Observers developed redundancy, cross-referencing multiple indicators such as lunar phases, star positions, river levels, and flowering patterns. Knowledge was carefully transmitted through generations. Priests trained novices to read shadows, record observations, and interpret celestial cues. In this way, empirical observation became institutionalized, ensuring continuity and resilience even in the face of environmental challenges. The spiritual dimension of Incan timekeeping reinforced its social and political significance. Inti, the sun god, was central to Incan cosmology, and the accurate observation of solar movements was considered a sacred duty. Temples became both observatories and ceremonial spaces, linking human activity to divine order. Festivals and rituals marked solstices and equinoxes, synchronizing labor, devotion, and civic participation. Through this integration, the empire maintained cohesion, aligning human effort with celestial patterns, a harmony between earthly survival and spiritual practice. Beyond the Andes, the legacy of Incan observation is profound. Their understanding of solar alignment, shadow measurement, and celestial cycles exemplifies early empirical reasoning in the Americas. By translating the movements of the sun into actionable guidance, the Inca created a system that merged science, culture, and governance. While their methods may seem simple compared to later mechanical or digital clocks, they were sophisticated in their adaptation to environment, society, and ritual, a testament to human ingenuity in challenging landscapes. Even with these accomplishments, questions lingered. How could knowledge survive as the empire expanded or faced upheaval? Could observers account for anomalies in climate or celestial behavior beyond immediate observation? And what mysteries of the Andean sky remained unseen, waiting for patient eyes to record them? These unresolved questions underscore the blend of mastery and humility that characterized Incan timekeeping. They could measure and organize, yet they always worked in partnership with forces larger than themselves. Ultimately, the story of Incan sun temples and their shadows teaches us about the ingenuity, resilience, and adaptability of human societies. By observing, recording, and responding to natural patterns, the Inca structured life, labor, and devotion across a vast and challenging landscape. Shadows became instruments of coordination, survival, and legitimacy, allowing communities to thrive and an empire to function with extraordinary cohesion. The Andes, with their sun-drenched terraces and sacred stones, remain a testament to a civilization that measured time not with gears or springs, but with careful attention, communal observation, and reverence for the cosmos. The sun set behind the mountains, casting long, precise shadows across terraces and temples. In those elongated silhouettes lay the quiet intelligence of a civilization attuned to the natural world. For the Inca, shadows were not merely the absence of light, they were guides, teachers, and arbiters of life itself. And in that careful, patient observation of the heavens, they created a rhythm that defined an empire, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire awe and wonder today. Story 6. Medieval Islamic Timekeeping and the Astrolabe. In bustling cities across the medieval Islamic world, Baghdad, Cordoba, Cairo, and Samarkand, life was measured by more than markets, prayers, and caravans. Time itself was a precise and sacred concern, guiding not only daily activities but religious devotion. For Islamic scholars, clerics, and astronomers, measuring hours required ingenuity, observation, and mathematical understanding. Without mechanical clocks as we know them today, they relied on instruments such as sundials, water clocks, and the astrolabe, a device of remarkable sophistication that could track celestial movements, determine prayer times, and even help navigate vast deserts. The astrolabe, often made of brass and finely engraved, allowed users to map the positions of stars, calculate latitude, and determine the time of day or night. By aligning the movable components with specific stars or the sun, scholars could solve practical problems that ranged from scheduling prayers to planning travel across unfamiliar terrain. The device was both practical and educational, teaching users to translate the heavens into actionable knowledge. Its operation required careful observation, meticulous calculation, and a deep understanding of geometry, astronomy, and mathematics, a blend of art, science, and devotion. Daily life in Islamic cities demanded temporal precision, especially because of the 5 daily prayers or salat, which were dictated by the sun's position. Fajr at dawn, Dhuhr at midday, Asr in the late afternoon, Maghrib at sunset, and Isha after nightfall. Determining these times accurately was not trivial, particularly in regions with varying latitudes or in the absence of modern clocks. Sundials offered a simple, visual method for daytime calculation, while water clocks provided continuous measurement when sunlight was insufficient. The astrolabe, however, allowed scholars to calculate prayer times for any location and season, making it indispensable for both urban and remote communities. Mosques became centers not only for worship but for timekeeping. Scholars and muezzins observed the sun, measured shadows, and consulted astrolabes to issue accurate calls to prayer. The timing of Ramadan fasts, the beginning of months in the lunar calendar, and the scheduling of religious festivals all depended on precise astronomical observation. Communities coordinated their work, trade, and social activities around these temporal markers, creating a society in which celestial observation and daily life were intimately connected. Beyond religious life, Islamic timekeeping had practical and scientific applications. Scholars used astrolabes to navigate deserts and seas, to chart the heavens, and to refine calendars. These instruments required both technical skill and careful observation. Slight errors could produce incorrect calculations, leading to misaligned prayer times or navigational mistakes. Students learned to read stars, calculate angles, and observe shadow lengths with precision, creating a culture that valued measurement, accuracy, and the careful recording of data. Water clocks, another important tool, were used in palaces, mosques, and urban centers to measure hours when sunlight was unavailable. Flow rates were calibrated, mechanisms maintained, and measurements cross-checked with celestial observations. These clocks, while mechanical in a simple sense, relied heavily on human oversight to ensure accuracy. Combined with sundials and astrolabes, they formed a multi-layered system capable of measuring time throughout the day and across seasons. The scholarly pursuit of timekeeping in the Islamic world also fostered the development of mathematics, trigonometry, and astronomy. Calculating shadow lengths, determining angles, and predicting celestial events required sophisticated knowledge, which was preserved in treatises and passed from teacher to student. These texts often included detailed diagrams of astrolabes, instructions for use, and methods for calculation, blending theoretical understanding with practical application. In this way, timekeeping became both a spiritual and intellectual endeavor. Yet even with careful observation, uncertainties persisted. Cloud cover, variable water flow, and human error introduced potential inaccuracies. Scholars developed methods to check and cross-reference measurements, creating redundancies that increased reliability. Observation was ongoing, iterative, and communal, emphasizing that accurate timekeeping required both skill and constant attention, a principle that applied equally to prayer, science, and navigation. For ordinary citizens, these systems translated into structure and reliability. Markets opened at consistent times, labor schedules aligned with prayers, and social life followed a predictable rhythm. Even travelers, guided by the instruments and records of Islamic scholars, could maintain a temporal connection to distant cities. In this society, celestial knowledge, observation, and measurement were not abstract pursuits, they were tools for survival, social order, and devotion. And yet, questions lingered. Could the precision achieved with astrolabes and water clocks be maintained across vast distances and generations? How would scholars account for local variations in latitude or the irregularities of lunar observation? And what new instruments or methods might arise to improve measurement further? These unanswered questions highlight the dynamic interplay between human ingenuity, observation, and the mysteries of the heavens, a tension that defined medieval Islamic timekeeping. It is here, amidst the crowded streets, sunlit courtyards, and quiet observatories, that the story pauses, poised to explore in Section 2 how these techniques influence daily life, governance, and scientific innovation. In the cities and courts of the medieval Islamic world, the movement of the sun and stars dictated far more than spiritual observance. It structured the rhythm of daily life, trade, and governance. Scholars, astronomers, and muezzins worked together to ensure that both citizens and rulers could rely on accurate time, aligning human activity with celestial cycles. Life was organized with remarkable precision, despite the absence of modern clocks, thanks to a combination of observation, instruments, and communal knowledge. Religious practice remained central. The 5 daily prayers, each anchored to a specific solar position, created a framework that divided the day into predictable segments. Determining the exact time for each prayer required careful observation of shadows, the sun's height, and sometimes even the astrolabe. Muezzins relied on guidance from scholars to call communities to prayer at precisely the right moment, ensuring not only religious compliance, but also the coordination of markets, workshops, and public life. Accurate timekeeping reinforced both devotion and social order. Calendrical observation, another key responsibility of scholars, was equally demanding. Islamic months follow a lunar cycle, and determining the start of a new month critical for festivals, Ramadan and Hajj, required careful sighting of the crescent moon. Mistakes could disrupt fasting schedules or ceremonial events, which were central to civic life and spiritual legitimacy. Astronomers and religious authorities collaborated closely, observing skies, recording patterns, and issuing rulings that synchronized communities across vast regions. In effect, celestial observation became the backbone of temporal coordination for both sacred and secular purposes. Timekeeping also played a vital role in navigation and commerce. Caravans crossing deserts or traders sailing across the Indian Ocean relied on the positions of stars and solar measurements to maintain schedules and avoid hazards. Astrolabes were portable tools, enabling travelers to calculate latitude and estimate time accurately, even far from urban centers. By combining observation with mathematical calculation, Islamic scholars created systems that transformed knowledge of the heavens into practical instruments for survival, trade, and communication. Urban administration was deeply intertwined with temporal precision. Market hours, legal proceedings, and municipal work were all scheduled according to observable time markers. Large cities required coordination. Food distribution, irrigation schedules, and civic ceremonies depended on reliable methods for measuring hours. Water clocks, sundials, and astrolabes provided overlapping systems of verification, ensuring that no disruption in daily rhythm would compromise public order. Timekeeping thus became a tool of governance, allowing rulers and administrators to manage sprawling populations efficiently. Education and scholarship were equally influenced by these practices. Students in observatories, madrasas, and mosques were trained to read celestial patterns, use astrolabes, and interpret shadow lengths with meticulous care. Mathematical skills, geometric reasoning, and observational rigor were integrated into the study of time, blending scientific inquiry with practical necessity. By the end of their training, scholars could calculate prayer times, forecast lunar months, and navigate distant lands, all based on careful empirical observation and mathematical understanding. This culture of precise measurement and intellectual rigor laid the foundation for later advances in astronomy, mathematics, and navigation throughout the Islamic world and beyond. Yet precision was never guaranteed. Clouds could obscure the sun, water flow in clepsydras could vary, and human error could introduce small but consequential mistakes. To mitigate these uncertainties, scholars relied on redundancy, multiple instruments, repeated measurements, and cross-referencing with prior observations. Communities understood that while instruments and observation improved accuracy, they could not fully eliminate unpredictability. Adaptation, verification, and communal oversight were essential for sustaining a reliable temporal framework. Even ordinary people internalized the rhythm created by these timekeeping practices. Merchants opened shops according to prayer times, artisans scheduled labor around solar cues, and students observed celestial markers to learn the intricacies of both science and daily life. Time, measured through sun, shadow, and stars, became a shared structure connecting individual effort, spiritual practice, and civic responsibility. In a society without mechanical clocks, the heavens themselves served as the ultimate reference. Yet questions remained. Could these methods maintain accuracy across regions with differing latitudes? How could knowledge be transmitted faithfully across generations or between distant cities? And what innovations might arise to further refine the measurement of hours and celestial events? These uncertainties underscored the dynamic nature of timekeeping in the medieval Islamic world, where observation, ingenuity, and human collaboration intersected with natural forces. Through this careful observation of the sun and stars, Islamic scholars created a system that was both practical and intellectually sophisticated. Timekeeping shaped religion, commerce, governance, and education, connecting human life to the cosmos with an elegance that balanced accuracy and adaptability. The astrolabe, water clock, and sundial were more than tools, they were instruments of societal coordination, scientific discovery, and spiritual practice. As night fell over the cities and deserts, the scholars recorded the positions of stars and noted the passing of hours, ensuring that the community's temporal framework remained precise. Their work demonstrated that measurement, observation, and intellectual rigor could transform ordinary celestial patterns into a structure capable of guiding empires. Yet the mysteries of the heavens remained unmapped, unpredictable, and waiting for patient observers to reveal their hidden order. As dawn broke over the desert sands and city rooftops, the streets of Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo stirred with movement. Merchants arranged goods, scholars ascended to observatories, and muezzins climbed minarets to prepare the call to prayer. Time was everywhere etched in shadows, flowing through water, and inscribed in brass on the faces of astrolabes. In this world, hours were not abstract. They were tangible, measured with care, and integrated into every aspect of life. The astrolabe, more than a scientific instrument, represented a philosophy of observation. By aligning its components with stars and the sun, scholars could determine prayer times, forecast lunar months, calculate latitude, and solve complex astronomical problems. This combination of mathematics, careful observation, and hands-on use allowed the medieval Islamic world to synchronize daily life with celestial order. Every rotation, measurement, and calculation transformed abstract celestial patterns into practical guidance for human activity. Religious observance remained the cornerstone of timekeeping. The 5 daily prayers, spaced according to solar height and shadow length, regulated the rhythm of city life. Muezzins and scholars worked together to ensure precision, coordinating communities across vast distances. Observing the moon determined the start of months and festivals, linking spiritual life with empirical observation. Accuracy was both sacred and practical. Mistimed prayers or miscalculated fasting periods could disrupt community cohesion, while correct measurement reinforced faith and social order. Beyond religious life, timekeeping shaped governance, commerce, and exploration. City administrators relied on measured hours to manage markets, regulate labor, and coordinate public works. Traders used astrolabes to navigate deserts, rivers, and seas, turning celestial observation into practical survival. Even students in madrasas learned that accurate observation of the heavens was a skill applicable to multiple spheres of life: spiritual, civic, and scientific. Knowledge of the stars became a bridge connecting individual action to societal structure. The practice of repeated observation and verification was critical. Water clocks had to be calibrated, sundials adjusted for changing seasons, and shadow measurements double-checked. Clouds, storms, and human error could always introduce uncertainty. Scholars mitigated this by cross-referencing multiple instruments, comparing observations across days and seasons, and preserving meticulous records. In this system, measurement was iterative and collaborative. Accuracy was achieved not by a single observation, but through careful repetition and communal oversight. These methods also contributed to the broader intellectual tradition. Scholars recorded techniques, shared astronomical tables, and developed trigonometry to refine calculations. The work of Islamic astronomers preserved centuries of observation and applied mathematics, influencing later European science and navigation. By treating observation as a rigorous, repeatable practice, they created a culture in which careful attention, empirical verification, and calculation were central to knowledge production. Yet challenges remained. Celestial events could surprise even the most diligent observers, instruments could fail, and the transmission of knowledge over distances and generations was never guaranteed. Scholars understood that precision required both human discipline and humility before the natural world. The dynamic tension between measured accuracy and the unpredictability of the heavens drove innovation, creating methods and instruments that became increasingly sophisticated over time. Ultimately, medieval Islamic timekeeping demonstrates the extraordinary human ability to translate natural patterns into structured life. Through sundials, water clocks, and astrolabes, the heavens became instruments of coordination, devotion, and exploration. Communities measured and organized themselves according to celestial rhythms, linking survival, faith, and knowledge in an integrated system. Time was observed, calculated, and shared, connecting the movements of the stars with the daily lives of millions. As the sun set over the desert and city walls, shadows lengthened and the first stars appeared. Scholars recorded the positions of celestial bodies, merchants closed shops, and muezzins prepared for evening prayer. In every calculation, in every shadow and dripping clepsydra, was a testament to human ingenuity and diligence, the careful observation of the heavens shaping life on Earth. And yet, mysteries persisted: unknown stars, variable seasons, and the vast expanse of the cosmos awaited patient observers. Even in this highly ordered system, the universe retained its secrets, reminding humanity that observation and measurement are not endpoints, but ongoing journeys of curiosity, skill, and wonder. Story 7: Roman Sundials and the Organization of Daily Life. In the bustling heart of ancient Rome, life unfolded according to a rhythm dictated by the movement of the sun across the sky. Citizens, merchants, soldiers, and magistrates relied on the simple yet ingenious sundial to structure their days. These devices, often placed in public spaces such as the forum or private courtyards, translated sunlight into measurable hours, allowing Romans to coordinate work, civic duties, and leisure with remarkable precision. The passage of shadows became the invisible hand organizing urban life. Roman sundials were both practical and symbolic. Early designs consisted of a gnomon, a vertical rod or triangular projection whose shadow fell upon a marked surface, indicating the time of day. As the sun moved from east to west, the shadow traced a path that divided daylight into 12 hours, though the length of these hours changed with the seasons. Despite the variability, sundials allowed Romans to measure time more accurately than ever before, linking celestial movement with the daily routines of citizens. Beyond private homes, public sundials played a central role in civic life. Temples, marketplaces, and administrative offices often featured prominently displayed dials. Citizens consulted them to plan meetings, manage commercial transactions, or participate in political assemblies. The measurement of hours governed not only commerce but the functioning of government. Courts convened, speeches were delivered, and magistrates performed their duties according to the predictable rhythm of the sun. Timekeeping became both a practical tool and a visible sign of order and civilization. The Romans also developed portable sundials for travelers and officials. These compact devices allowed soldiers and merchants moving across provinces to maintain a sense of temporal orientation, aligning their activities with those of the city or administrative center. Precision mattered. Even minor misalignment could disrupt trade schedules, military coordination, or religious observances. The sophistication of Roman sundials, combined with their widespread use, created a standardized temporal framework across the empire. Daily life in Rome reflected this reliance on solar measurement. Citizens rose with the sun, shops and workshops opened at predictable hours, and public baths followed regulated schedules. Laborers, artisans, and officials all synchronized their work with the progression of daylight, relying on shadows rather than mechanical devices. Even leisure was scheduled. Public games, theatrical performances, and festivals adhered to solar hours, ensuring that urban life moved with a collective rhythm. Innovation and calibration were essential. Sundials required careful orientation to true north and adjustment for local latitude. Skilled craftsmen inscribed hour lines and decorated dials with numerical markers or symbolic motifs. Wealthy households often installed elaborate private sundials in gardens, blending utility with aesthetics. Scholars and engineers maintained records of sun positions and seasonal variations, developing corrections that allowed these devices to maintain reasonable accuracy throughout the year. Romans also used other methods to complement sundials, particularly during cloudy days or at night. Water clocks, known as clepsydras, measured time by the steady flow of water between vessels, providing a continuous measure of hours regardless of sunlight. In courts and baths, water clocks ensured that trials or bathing sessions adhered to fixed durations, reinforcing civic order. These instruments, while simple in principle, required constant monitoring and maintenance to remain reliable. The integration of sundials and clepsydras into Roman society illustrates the empire's commitment to organization and efficiency. Time was no longer abstract, it was observable, measurable, and woven into the very fabric of urban life. Citizens learned to read shadows, interpret flowing water, and coordinate activities according to these cues. By doing so, they aligned human endeavor with natural cycles, creating a society in which order and predictability were tangible. Yet, even with these innovations, uncertainty persisted. Seasonal variations changed the length of daylight hours, weather could obscure shadows, and water clocks required constant attention. Romans compensated through redundancy, observation, and communal vigilance. Public displays of sundials reinforced synchronization, while skilled technicians calibrated instruments for accuracy. The system was resilient, practical, and socially enforced, ensuring that time remained a shared resource rather than an individual abstraction. Questions remained for the observant Roman. How could hours be measured consistently across provinces with varying latitudes? How could knowledge of timekeeping techniques be transmitted reliably across generations? And what further refinements might be devised to reconcile natural variability with human schedules? Even in a civilization as ordered as Rome, time retained its mysteries and challenges, demanding careful observation, skill, and adaptation. In these sunlit spaces, forums, courtyards, and baths, the shadow of a gnomon quietly marked the rhythm of life. Each passing hour connected citizens to the cosmos, aligned labor with leisure, and structured the sprawling complexity of the empire. For the Romans, time was both practical and symbolic, a measure of order, a guide for civic life, and a reflection of the human desire to harmonize with natural rhythms. In the sprawling cities and provinces of the Roman Empire, time was not merely a personal concern, it was a mechanism for social organization, political authority, and economic coordination. Sundials and clepsydras, though seemingly mundane instruments, became essential tools for maintaining the rhythm of urban life and the functioning of an empire that stretched from the windswept coasts of Britain to the sun-drenched valleys of Egypt. Public sundials in the forum and in city squares served as focal points for civic life. Markets opened when shadows aligned with specific hour markers, ensuring that merchants and buyers could coordinate their activities with minimal confusion. Workshops and artisan guilds followed solar cues to structure labor, while soldiers in barracks timed drills and routines according to the sun's passage. In effect, the gnomon, the simple vertical rod casting a shadow, regulated the lives of thousands, silently enforcing order across a complex urban environment. Clepsydras or water clocks were equally important in contexts where sundials failed. In courtrooms, magistrates relied on them to time trials, ensuring that legal proceedings adhered to a predictable schedule. In public baths, where patrons expected structured hours of access, water clocks maintained fairness and efficiency. Even theater performances and gladiatorial games could be regulated by the steady drip of water, allowing organizers to maintain control over events attended by thousands. These instruments, though simple, were indispensable for coordinating activities in a society that prized precision and order. Daily life for ordinary Romans revolved around these measures. Citizens learned to read the shadows on public dials and adjust their routines accordingly. Laborers rose with the sun, shopkeepers timed their openings and closings, and students and scribes structured study according to daylight hours. The awareness of time became a shared cultural rhythm, linking the personal, civic, and economic spheres. Even leisure and entertainment were governed by temporal cues, ensuring that festivals, games, and feasts unfolded in harmony with the city's collective schedule. The sophistication of Roman timekeeping reflected both technological skill and social necessity. Sundials required precise orientation to align with true north and to account for the changing length of daylight throughout the year. Clepsydras needed careful calibration and supervision to maintain a steady flow of water. Skilled artisans and engineers were tasked with designing, constructing, and maintaining these instruments, and their expertise became a valued component of civic infrastructure. The accurate measurement of hours was not incidental. It was central to maintaining urban cohesion and imperial efficiency. Timekeeping also reinforced political authority. Magistrates, governors, and emperors relied on synchronized schedules to coordinate public events, military operations, and administrative work. The visibility of sundials in public spaces served as a subtle reminder of the state's organization and control over daily life. By structuring the rhythms of society, these instruments helped reinforce the hierarchy and expectations that kept the sprawling empire functional and unified. Yet challenges persisted. Seasonal variation altered the apparent length of hours, clouds and rain obscured sundials, and water clocks required constant maintenance. To address these uncertainties, Romans developed overlapping systems. Sundials were complemented by clepsydras. Public displays reinforced personal observation, and skilled overseers ensured instruments were accurate. These redundancies reflected a pragmatic understanding that measurement required both human vigilance and technological support. The cultural impact of these timekeeping practices extended beyond practical concerns. Awareness of hours, shadows, and the flow of water shaped Roman attitudes toward discipline, order, and personal responsibility. Citizens internalized temporal structures, aligning their actions with both societal expectation and natural rhythm. This integration of measurement into everyday life created a society in which order and predictability were not merely administrative tools, they were lived experiences, shaping work, worship, and leisure. Yet even with sophisticated instruments, questions remained. Could these methods be standardized across distant provinces, where latitude and local conditions differed? How could knowledge of construction, calibration, and observation be transmitted reliably across generations? And what further innovations might emerge to reconcile natural variability with the desire for precision? These questions highlight the ongoing negotiation between human ingenuity and the forces of nature, a tension that the Romans managed with remarkable skill, patience, and practical reasoning. In the sunlit forum, the shadow of a gnomon slowly crept across the marble surface, guiding citizens as they conducted commerce, attended civic duties, and navigated daily life. Each measurement, each calibrated drip of water, connected ordinary life to the cosmos and to the machinery of empire. Roman timekeeping was more than a technical accomplishment. It was a social instrument, a cultural framework, and a testament to human ingenuity in organizing complex societies according to the natural rhythms of the world. As the sun rose over the rooftops and colonnades of Rome, shadows stretched across the forum, marking hours invisible yet universally recognized. For the Romans, these shadows were far more than passive signs of passing time. They were instruments of order, coordinating commerce, governance, labor, and leisure across a sprawling urban and imperial landscape. Through sundials, water clocks, and careful observation, the empire wove the abstract concept of time into the very fabric of daily life. Sundials, often prominently displayed in public squares, allowed citizens to structure their activities with precision. Merchants set opening hours, laborers began work at designated times, and magistrates scheduled civic duties to align with the sun's movement. The shadow of a gnomon was both practical and symbolic, a visible reminder that life, commerce, and government operated according to shared temporal rules. In a society that prized order and discipline, timekeeping became a civic virtue as much as a scientific achievement. Water clocks, or clepsydras, complemented these visual cues, providing continuous measurement when the sun was obscured or night fell. In courts, clepsydras timed trials, enforcing fairness and efficiency. In baths, the flowing water regulated the schedules of patrons, ensuring equitable access. Even games and public spectacles relied on these instruments to maintain structure over hours of performance. In essence, Romans transformed natural forces, sunlight and flowing water, into tools of administration, ritual, and social coordination. The integration of timekeeping into daily life extended beyond mere practicality. Knowledge of hours and shadows shaped the social consciousness of citizens. Individuals internalized temporal patterns, learning to coordinate labor, commerce, and leisure with both natural and civic rhythms. Observing the sun, reading the flow of water, and consulting public dials became ordinary practices that reinforced social cohesion, personal discipline, and the expectation that life should align with both the cosmos and the state. Roman engineers and artisans contributed crucial expertise. Sundials had to be oriented with precise attention to latitude, seasonal variation, and true north. Water clocks required careful calibration, regular maintenance, and understanding of fluid dynamics. Records of previous observations informed adjustments, creating a culture of empirical measurement. These systems demanded skill, observation, and ongoing attention, demonstrating that the success of an empire relied not only on military might or political authority, but also on meticulous management of time. Political authority itself was reinforced through these measures. Magistrates, governors, and the emperor could orchestrate events, rituals, and public administration with reliable timing, projecting order and control across diverse populations. The visibility of sundials and public clocks communicated the state's mastery over both natural phenomena and civic life. Citizens experienced the authority of the empire not only through laws and decrees, but through the steady, predictable cadence of measured hours. Yet, as with all human systems, uncertainty persisted. Seasonal changes altered the length of daylight hours, clouds obscured shadows, and water clocks required constant supervision. Romans mitigated these challenges through overlapping systems, redundant measurement, and communal observation. The careful calibration of instruments, coupled with shared knowledge of natural cycles, allowed society to function effectively despite the inherent variability of the natural world. The influence of Roman timekeeping extended beyond Rome itself. Provinces across the empire adopted sundials and water clocks, aligning local life with central authority. Trade, governance, and military logistics were coordinated through a shared understanding of hours and daily rhythms. Even in remote regions, the principles of observation, measurement, and disciplined scheduling shaped both survival and civic organization. Shadows cast on stone in a distant town reflected the same solar patterns as those in the heart of the city, linking disparate communities into a unified temporal framework. Questions lingered even for the most attentive Romans. How could timekeeping be standardized across the diverse climates and latitudes of the empire? How could knowledge of instrument construction, calibration, and observation persist reliably through generations? and what innovations might arise to reconcile the variability of nature with the human desire for precision. These challenges reflected the perpetual tension between order and uncertainty, a tension that human ingenuity continually sought to address. Ultimately, Roman sundials and water clocks reveal a society that measured more than hours. They measured life, labor, and civic order. Shadows regulated activity, flowing water enforced schedules, and the rhythm of the sun structured the complex machinery of empire. By observing, recording, and applying natural phenomena, Romans created a civilization in which time became both a practical tool and a shared cultural framework. The gnomons' shadow, silently moving across stone, governed empires, coordinated communities, and left a legacy that would echo through centuries of human effort to measure and master time. As the day waned and the sun sank behind the distant hills, shadows lengthened and stretched across forums, baths, and streets. In those elongated silhouettes lay the quiet intelligence of Roman civilization, a testament to the ingenuity, discipline, and observation that shaped not only the hours of the day, but the organization of society itself. Even in the simplest act of observing a shadow, the Romans revealed how profoundly humans could structure life by measuring the passage of the sun. Story 8. Medieval Japanese Temple Bells and the Measure of Days. In the misty hills and river valleys of medieval Japan, life moved with a rhythm dictated not by clocks or calendars, but by the resonant echoes of temple bells. Monks in Zen and Buddhist temples played a central role in marking the passage of time, using bronze bells, known as bancho, to announce hours, signal ceremonies, and regulate both spiritual and secular life. The sound of these bells drifted across villages, towns, and cultivated fields, creating a shared temporal framework that structured the daily existence of ordinary people. The ringing of a temple bell was far more than ceremonial. It was a public timekeeping system. Each day, monks followed strict schedules, striking the bell at dawn, midday, evening, and night, delineating the hours for work, prayer, and rest. Farmers in the surrounding villages began their labors with the morning toll, paused for meals and reflection at noon, and concluded their tasks in response to evening echoes. These bells served as auditory markers in a world without mechanical clocks, uniting entire communities under a common sense of temporal order. Monastic discipline shaped the precision and consistency of bell ringing. Novice monks were trained to observe natural light, the position of the sun, and the flow of daily activity to determine the appropriate timing for each toll. Bell schedules were integrated with ceremonial rituals, meditation periods, and communal meals, creating a cyclical pattern that harmonized human labor with spiritual practice. Through careful observation and repeated action, monks translated the abstract passage of time into a tangible experience for all who lived nearby. The bells themselves were carefully crafted and maintained. Bronze was cast and tuned to produce clear, resonant tones capable of traveling long distances, sometimes several kilometers across valleys and rivers. Monks and artisans adjusted the size, thickness, and striking method to optimize sound, ensuring that the bell communicated reliably to communities spread across rugged terrain. A well-timed, clearly ringing bell became a symbol of order, both spiritual and social, reinforcing the authority of the temple and the rhythm of village life. Beyond daily labor, the bells coordinated seasonal festivals, harvest celebrations, and religious ceremonies. The precise timing of tolls signaled the start of meditation retreats, the beginning of New Year rituals, or the opening of markets. Villagers learned to interpret subtle differences in rhythm and intensity, understanding not only the hour but also the type of activity being announced. In this way, auditory timekeeping became a medium for cultural continuity, passing knowledge of daily schedules, seasonal cycles, and social expectations from one generation to the next. Monastic bells also shaped moral and ethical behavior. The constant, predictable toll of the bancho reminded individuals of impermanence, a core concept in Buddhist philosophy. Time was audible, tangible, and unavoidable. It was a teacher as well as a guide. Farmers, artisans, and merchants internalized the rhythm of the bells, coordinating their actions with both practical necessity and spiritual reflection. Life became a pattern of attentive listening and responsive action, integrating ordinary work with contemplation of larger, often intangible truths. The system was not without challenges. Weather could muffle sound, distant villages might fail to hear each toll, and human error in timing could disrupt schedules. Monks developed redundancy by using multiple bells, signaling with drums, or adjusting tolling intervals to compensate for environmental conditions. Careful observation and iterative refinement ensured the system remained reliable, demonstrating the Incan-like attention to detail that allowed communities to synchronize without mechanical precision. Even in urban areas, temple bells regulated commerce and governance. Markets, workshops, and administrative offices timed activities according to tolling schedules. Travelers and itinerant workers relied on bells to coordinate arrival and departure, ensuring that social and economic life flowed with predictable regularity. In this way, auditory timekeeping created a shared experience of temporal order, uniting diverse activities under the consistent rhythm of monastic observation. Yet, despite their reliability, questions persisted. How could bell schedules remain consistent across distant villages or between different temples? Could seasonal and environmental variations affect the perception and accuracy of tolling? And how would future generations adapt this auditory system as society grew more complex? These uncertainties illustrate the delicate balance between human ingenuity and the constraints of natural systems, highlighting the remarkable skill and discipline required to harmonize life with sound. In the valleys and hills of medieval Japan, the toll of a bronze bell shaped days, seasons, and social cohesion. Its echoes were more than sound, they were markers of human activity, tools of governance, and reminders of the impermanence and order that defined life. Monks transformed the intangible flow of time into a shared rhythm, connecting spiritual practice, labor, and community life in a world without mechanical clocks. In listening to these resonances, villagers and travelers alike learned to navigate the passage of days, bridging the natural world, human endeavor, and the sacred in a single, ringing voice. In medieval Japan, the daily toll of temple bells created a rhythm that extended far beyond the monastery walls. Villages, towns, and even remote farmsteads relied on the sound of bronze bells to regulate labor, prayer, and social interaction. Without mechanical clocks, these bells functioned as both timekeepers and unifying agents, linking human activity with the natural world and the spiritual life of the community. Farmers depended heavily on the morning bell to begin work in the fields. Rice paddies, wheat terraces, and vegetable gardens all required careful attention to sunlight, water, and seasonal cycles. When the bell tolled at dawn, it signaled the start of labor, marking not only time but a collective moment of shared effort. At midday, the toll indicated a pause for meals, rest, and reflection, while evening chimes guided villagers to conclude work, return home, or prepare for communal rituals. In this way, bronze resonances translated the abstract concept of hours into tangible action. Monastic bells also synchronized religious life. Meditation periods, chanting sessions, and ceremonial rites were conducted according to bell schedules, linking spiritual practice with the natural progression of day and night. Monks and priests carefully observed the sun, shadows, and seasonal shifts to ensure the timing of tolls reflected both celestial patterns and human needs. In monasteries, life was meticulously ordered. Breakfast, study, meditation, work, and rest followed an audible schedule, creating a model of temporal discipline that extended into the surrounding villages. The influence of bell tolling reached even social and economic activities. Markets opened and closed with the echoing chimes. Merchants timed trade and delivery according to auditory cues, and festivals or local events were announced with prolonged or repeated tolling. Travelers relied on these sounds to orient themselves, especially when navigating unfamiliar terrain. The sound of a bell was more than a signal. It was a form of communication, transmitting temporal and social information across both physical and cultural landscapes. Craftsmanship and acoustics were central to this system. Bronze bells were designed to produce clear, long-lasting tones capable of traveling great distances over hills, rivers, and forests. Artisans calibrated thickness, diameter, and striking methods to optimize resonance. Monks ensured regular maintenance and precise scheduling, understanding that even minor changes in timing or sound quality could disrupt the coordination of daily life. The bells were, in essence, instruments of both practical function and societal cohesion. Redundancy and adaptation were vital. Environmental factors, fog, rain, wind, or distance could obscure the sound, so temples often used multiple bells, gongs, or drums to reinforce signals. Observers adjusted tolling intervals based on seasonal variation in daylight, and in large villages, secondary signals sometimes accompanied the primary bell. This system of overlapping auditory cues ensured that even the most distant or distracted villagers could rely on the schedule. Observation, iteration, and communication became key components of temporal accuracy. The psychological impact of bell ringing was profound. Beyond scheduling work, bells instilled a sense of shared time and social unity. Hearing the same bell as neighbors or fellow villagers created a communal awareness of hours, linking individual labor to collective rhythms. Bells also conveyed moral and spiritual reminders. Their resonance symbolized impermanence, mindfulness, and the inescapable passage of time. Listening became an act of participation, connecting the natural, social, and spiritual worlds. Even as society grew more complex, these auditory systems adapted to meet new challenges. Seasonal agricultural festivals, communal construction projects, and religious pilgrimages were all coordinated with bell schedules, ensuring that disparate activities could coexist without conflict. Bells became an auditory map of society, guiding both ordinary life and large-scale endeavors, much as Roman sundials had regulated urban and civic life centuries earlier. Yet questions persisted. How could bell schedules be standardized across distant regions or different monastic traditions? How would communities respond to variations in environmental conditions or the maintenance needs of large bells? Could the auditory rhythm sustain social cohesion as populations expanded and commerce became more intricate? These questions illustrate the delicate balance between human ingenuity and the limits imposed by nature, echoing the tension between observation, discipline, and unpredictability. Through careful ringing, observation, and maintenance, Japanese monks created a temporal framework that connected daily labor, spiritual practice, and communal coordination. The sound of a bell became a shared reference point, an invisible hand shaping worship, and interaction. It linked individual lives with collective routines, natural cycles, and moral reflection, demonstrating how attention to sound could transform both practical timekeeping and the rhythm of society. As dusk settled over the terraced hills and river valleys of medieval Japan, the sound of a bronze bell rolled across the countryside, carrying with it the rhythm of human life. Farmers finishing their work in the paddies, artisans returning from town, and travelers navigating winding paths all paused to listen, orient themselves, and synchronize their next actions. In these resonant moments, the bell was far more than a signal. It was a medium that connected communities, nature, and spirituality, marking both the passage of time and the unity of shared experience. The monks who struck these bells understood their power and responsibility. Each toll was carefully timed to coordinate labor, prayer, and rest, ensuring that the daily rhythms of villages aligned with both human needs and the natural cycle of daylight. Bells were struck not arbitrarily but with careful attention to the sun's position, the sound's travel across valleys, and the requirements of religious ceremonies. In effect, monastic discipline transformed the intangible flow of hours into tangible, shared reality. The influence of bells extended beyond daily schedules. Seasonal events, harvests, and festivals were orchestrated through auditory signals, guiding communal effort and celebration. For instance, the opening and closing of rice harvest periods, the beginning of temple retreats, and ceremonial purification rites were all marked by bell tolls. Villagers internalized these cues, learning not only to follow schedules but to coordinate actions collectively. In this way, sound served as both instruction and reinforcement, binding communities through shared temporal awareness. The craftsmanship of the bells themselves reinforced their function. Bronze was carefully cast, tuned, and maintained to produce deep, resonant tones capable of traveling over hills, through forests, and across rivers. A bell's timbre was as important as its timing. Clarity ensured that even those at a distance could participate in the shared rhythm. Monks and artisans understood that the effectiveness of timekeeping depended on the marriage of precision in schedule and excellence in sound production. Auditory timekeeping also shaped social consciousness. The echo of a bell reminded villagers of the impermanence of each day, the moral weight of labor, and the passage of life itself. Work, worship, and rest were all framed within these resonances, encouraging mindfulness and attentiveness. The tolling became a silent teacher. It enforced discipline, reminded listeners of communal obligations, and reinforced the connection between human activity and the natural and spiritual order. Redundancy and observation ensured reliability. Multiple bells, supplementary gongs, and rhythmic variation helped compensate for environmental challenges such as fog, rain, or distance. Villagers learned to read these signals, understanding subtle differences in tone, rhythm, or sequence to anticipate tasks, ceremonies, or seasonal changes. Observation and repetition created a resilient auditory system, one that could adapt to unpredictable conditions while maintaining cohesion across communities. Yet, as with all human systems, questions persisted. How could bell schedules remain consistent across remote regions with different monastic practices? Could the sound reach all villagers reliably during storms or dense fog? How might future generations adapt these auditory systems as society became more complex, populations grew, and commerce intensified? These uncertainties reflect the ongoing negotiation between human ingenuity and environmental constraints, a challenge that the Japanese monks met with discipline, creativity, and community engagement. Ultimately, the story of temple bells in medieval Japan illustrates how simple tools, when applied with care and understanding, can transform society. Bronze resonances structured labor, coordinated social life, and guided spiritual practice, creating a shared temporal framework that connected individuals across space and time. In listening to the toll of a bell, villagers were participating not only in the measurement of hours, but in a collective harmony that blended the practical, spiritual, and communal. As night fell and the first stars appeared, the echo of the final toll lingered across the valleys. It carried the invisible order of life itself, the coordinated labor of farmers, the meditation of monks, the rhythms of communities attuned to both natural and spiritual cycles. Each reverberation was a reminder that human societies, even without mechanical clocks, can create intricate and enduring systems for measuring time, integrating daily life with the natural and the sacred. In the quiet resonance of bronze, medieval Japan found a rhythm that guided, disciplined, and connected its people, an audible thread weaving together life, work, and devotion. Story 9. Medieval European monastic timekeeping and the bell tower. In the quiet stone cloisters of medieval Europe, life unfolded according to a rhythm dictated by the movement of the sun and the resonant tolls of monastery bells. Monks followed strict schedules for prayer, study, and labor, while the surrounding towns and villages relied on these auditory signals to structure daily activity. The bell tower, rising above abbeys and cathedrals, was both a spiritual symbol and a practical instrument, marking the passage of hours in an age before mechanical clocks became widespread. Daily life in monasteries was regimented. The canonical hours matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline divided the day into segments punctuated by prayer. Monks observed each hour with precise attention, striking bells to summon fellow brothers, signal transitions, and maintain communal discipline. The timing of these bells was carefully calibrated to natural light, shadow, and seasonal variation, creating a system in which spiritual and practical life were inseparable. Surrounding communities came to rely on these tolls for temporal orientation. Villagers, artisans, and laborers adjusted their routines according to the monastery's schedule. Markets opened and closed with the chimes, and workshops structured work around midday and evening calls. Even travelers used bell sounds as markers for orientation, guiding themselves towards settlements or inns. Bells transformed religious ritual into a broader public instrument, creating a shared understanding of time that connected sacred and secular life. The construction and maintenance of bell towers required skill, precision, and foresight. Towers had to be tall enough to project sound across villages, stable enough to support heavy bronze bells, and accessible for maintenance and ringing. Bell makers carefully tuned their instruments, adjusting size, thickness, and alloy composition to produce clear tones capable of carrying long distances. Monks or appointed bell ringers were trained to strike at precise intervals, ensuring that both the monastery and the surrounding community received accurate temporal cues. In addition to daily schedules, bells marked significant events and regulated social order. Festivals, religious processions, and civic announcements were signaled by special sequences or prolonged tolls. A sudden alarm, like the tolling of a fire bell or warning of approaching danger, could mobilize an entire town, demonstrating the dual practical and symbolic function of the bell. Timekeeping became inseparable from social cohesion, morality, and security. The synchronization of bell ringing with natural cycles required careful observation. Monks observed sunrise and sunset, monitored the lengthening and shortening of days, and adjusted ringing schedules accordingly. Seasonal variations were accounted for by modifying intervals or changing the number of tolls, ensuring that temporal measurement remained reliable despite fluctuations in daylight. Observation and adaptation were as important as the physical instrument itself, reflecting a disciplined approach to aligning human activity with natural rhythms. Yet challenges persisted. Weather, fog, or storms could muffle sound, while distance limited auditory reach. Bells required regular maintenance to avoid cracks or misalignment. Human error in timing could disrupt communal schedules or ritual observances. Redundancy was introduced. Multiple bells, coordinated sequences, and audible markers from adjacent structures ensured consistency, highlighting the blend of technological, observational, and social ingenuity necessary to maintain reliable temporal order. Monastic timekeeping also reinforced spiritual and moral frameworks. The tolling of bells reminded villagers and monks alike of the passing of hours and the impermanence of life, encouraging mindfulness and reflection. Labor, prayer, and communal activity were all framed within this audible rhythm, blending practical necessity with ethical and spiritual instruction. By integrating timekeeping into daily life, monasteries shaped not only schedules but also consciousness, creating a disciplined, attentive society. Questions lingered for those attentive to temporal precision. Could bell schedules be maintained consistently across regions with varying daylight and climatic conditions? How could knowledge of bell construction, ringing techniques, and calibration be transmitted reliably over generations? What innovations might emerge to reconcile the limits of sound propagation with the human desire for standardized measurement. These uncertainties highlight the ongoing negotiation between human ingenuity, technology, and natural constraints, a negotiation that monks managed with diligence and observation. In the quiet stone courtyards and surrounding village streets, the echo of bells structured the rhythms of life. Each toll connected prayer, labor, and civic activity, creating a shared temporal framework. Time, made audible, became a bridge between sacred ritual and ordinary existence, between monastic discipline and the practical needs of surrounding communities. In listening to the ringing towers, people learned to coordinate their actions, orient themselves in space and season, and participate in a collective order that transcended individual perception. The resonant toll of a monastery bell in medieval Europe extended far beyond the walls of stone cloisters, guiding the lives of villagers, craftsmen, and travelers in nearby towns. For communities without mechanical clocks, these bells were not merely symbols of religious devotion, they were essential instruments for coordinating daily life, regulating labor, and enforcing social cohesion. Each chime provided a temporal reference, creating a rhythm that structured work, worship, and civic activity across entire regions. Farmers and laborers relied on the morning toll to begin their work in the fields. Sunlight might dictate the feasibility of certain tasks, but the bell provided a communal cue. Fields filled with coordinated effort, animals were tended, and irrigation systems were managed according to an agreed schedule. Midday and evening tolls punctuated rest and meals, creating a predictable daily cycle that reduced uncertainty and reinforced communal cooperation. The auditory signal connected individual labor to a larger rhythm shared by the entire village. Markets and workshops also synchronized with bell ringing. Merchants timed openings and closings to the toll of the bell, ensuring coordination with buyers and fellow sellers. Artisans measured labor periods and breaks according to these auditory cues, maintaining productivity in environments where written schedules or timepieces were rare. In urban centers, where multiple abbeys or churches might exist, overlapping bell sequences established a mesh of temporal coordination, allowing residents to navigate complex social and economic networks efficiently. Monastic bells also regulated religious life for the broader community. Parishioners timed attendance at daily prayers, confession, or mass according to the audible signals from nearby abbeys. Festivals, processions, and holy days were announced and structured by special sequences or prolonged tolls, uniting communities in ritual observance. Bells reinforced the moral and spiritual framework of society, reminding individuals of divine presence, mortality, and ethical responsibility throughout the day. Craftsmanship and maintenance ensured reliability. Bell makers carefully selected alloys, adjusted thickness, and tuned their instruments to maximize resonance. Monks or appointed bell ringers learned precise techniques for striking, timing, and coordinating sequences. Towers were built to amplify sound over distances, accounting for local topography and the needs of dispersed communities. Redundancy, multiple bells, secondary chimes, or rhythmic variation helped overcome challenges posed by weather, distance, and human error. Auditory timekeeping shaped not only daily schedules but also consciousness. The bell's toll was a constant reminder of human mortality, the passage of time, and the necessity of attention and discipline. Monastic communities used these cues to cultivate mindfulness, while villagers internalized temporal structures, aligning their work, worship, and social interactions with predictable rhythms. Listening to and responding to bells became an ingrained part of life, merging practical action with moral and spiritual awareness. Challenges persisted, however. Seasonal variations affected daylight, sound propagation was influenced by fog or storms, and bell maintenance was labor-intensive. Monks and communities developed adaptive strategies, adjusting tolling intervals, using multiple bells, and coordinating with nearby abbeys to ensure consistency. Observation and iteration became central to the system, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of natural limitations and the need for human vigilance. Timekeeping through bells also reinforced political and social hierarchies. Lords, magistrates, and abbots could orchestrate events, control labor schedules, and mobilize communities with audible signals. Bells became instruments of authority, linking daily activity with institutional power. Citizens experienced governance not only through laws or decrees, but through the structure imposed by sound, demonstrating the subtle ways in which temporal order shaped social organization. Yet questions remained. Could bell ringing be standardized across distant regions with different monasteries or church traditions? How could techniques for striking, maintenance, and calibration persist reliably through generations? And how might innovations address the limits of sound propagation or environmental interference? These uncertainties highlight the dynamic tension between human ingenuity, social coordination, and the constraints of nature attention that medieval Europeans managed with patience, observation, and communal effort. By integrating audible timekeeping into the daily lives of both monks and villagers, medieval European monasteries created a temporal network that connected labor, worship, and social life. Bells transformed the abstract flow of hours into a shared experience, linking human activity with celestial cycles and institutional authority. In listening and responding to the tolling towers, communities learned to navigate time collectively, blending practical necessity with spiritual and social awareness. As twilight descended on the hillsides and valleys of medieval Europe, the solemn tolling of monastery bells carried across towns and fields, marking the passage of the day. Each strike was a reminder of the structured rhythm that governed both monastic life and the communities beyond the cloisters. For villagers, artisans, and travelers, these sounds were indispensable guides, connecting ordinary labor to spiritual practice, civic duty, and communal life. Inside the monasteries, life followed a disciplined cadence. Prayer, study, and manual labor were punctuated by the sound of bells, each canonical hour signaling a transition from one activity to another. Monks maintained meticulous schedules, carefully observing sunlight, seasonal variation, and environmental conditions to ensure that tolls aligned with both practical and spiritual needs. The bell tower became a tool of coordination, turning the abstract passage of time into a tangible, communal experience. Beyond the monastery, the echoes of bells created a shared temporal framework. Farmers relied on morning chimes to begin tending fields, while midday and evening tolls structured meals, rest, and family life. Markets opened and closed in sync with audible cues, and artisans timed their work and breaks to correspond with bell schedules. Even travelers, unfamiliar with a village's layout, could orient themselves by listening for the nearest ringing tower. The sound of a bell was, in essence, a connective thread that synchronized activity across space and social strata. Bells also regulated social and civic order. Prolonged tolling announced festivals, legal summons, or emergencies, conveying information quickly and efficiently across communities. In some cases, bells acted as early warning systems. A sudden, urgent sequence could mobilize villagers to respond to fires, floods, or invading forces. The auditory reach of these instruments allowed monasteries to exert influence far beyond their walls, linking spiritual authority with social coordination. Craftsmanship and maintenance were essential to the reliability of this system. Bell makers selected metals and alloys to optimize resonance, tuned instruments to produce clear tones, and constructed towers to amplify sound across distances. Monks or designated bell ringers developed specialized skills for timing, striking, and coordinating sequences. Redundancy using multiple bells, rhythmic variations, or additional signals ensured that the temporal framework remained resilient despite environmental challenges such as storms, fog, or wind. The psychological and spiritual impact of bell ringing was profound. Each toll reminded listeners of the impermanence of life, the steady passage of hours, and the need for mindfulness. Monastic communities used the chimes to cultivate attention, discipline, and contemplation, while villagers internalized the rhythm, aligning labor, worship, and social activity with the shared cadence. Bells bridged the secular and sacred, integrating the flow of daily life with moral and spiritual instruction. Yet challenges persisted. Variations in local practices, distances between monasteries, and environmental obstacles could disrupt timing or clarity. Knowledge of bell construction, ringing techniques, and maintenance had to be transmitted carefully across generations. Communities had to adapt to seasonal changes in daylight while preserving the integrity of schedules. These limitations highlight the tension between human ingenuity, social organization, and natural constraints, a tension that medieval Europeans managed with remarkable discipline and observation. Ultimately, monastic bells shaped not only the hours of the day but the very structure of medieval society. They transformed the abstract passage of time into a shared, audible rhythm, coordinating work, worship, commerce, and social life. Through attentive listening and disciplined action, communities aligned themselves with both natural cycles and institutional authority. The bell tower became a symbol of order, guidance, and collective responsibility, linking spiritual devotion with practical life. As night settled over cloisters and villages, the echoes of the final toll lingered across the land. They carried with them the invisible structure of society, the coordination of labor, the cadence of worship, and the shared awareness of time's passage. In the enduring resonance of these bells, medieval Europeans experienced both the practical and the sacred, discovering that even in a world without mechanical clocks, sound could structure life, unify communities, and connect the human to the celestial. Story 10. Native American Sky Observatories and Seasonal Timekeeping. Long before mechanical clocks or written calendars, Native American communities across North America relied on the sky itself to measure time. In the vast plains, desert mesas, and forested valleys, the rising and setting of the sun, moon, and stars marked the passage of days, months, and seasons. Communities constructed observatories, carefully aligned stone circles, mounds, and cliffside markers to observe celestial events, translating the movements of the heavens into practical guidance for agriculture, ritual, and survival. Among the most notable examples were the earthworks of the Hopewell and Mississippian cultures in the eastern woodlands. These societies built intricate mound complexes aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles. For observers within these spaces, the rising sun on a specific day would illuminate a marker or gap between stones, signaling the change of seasons. These markers were essential for timing planting, harvesting, and communal ceremonies, connecting human activity to celestial patterns with precision and care. The precision of these observatories required careful observation across generations. Elders and spiritual leaders recorded the positions of the sun, moon, and prominent stars, noting the subtle shifts that marked seasonal change. Children learned to recognize these patterns through oral tradition and participation in ceremonies, internalizing knowledge that was both scientific and spiritual. In essence, these communities created living calendars, integrating observation with cultural continuity and practical necessity. The alignment of structures with celestial phenomena was not arbitrary. At Chaco Canyon, for example, the sun's light would pass through specially constructed windows and openings on solstice and equinox days, illuminating interior markers that guided ceremonial events and agricultural planning. Similarly, stone circles in the Midwest and Southwest allowed observers to predict seasonal floods, frost periods, or the emergence of key plants. These sky observatories acted as both scientific instruments and spiritual anchors, linking observation, survival, and ritual. Agricultural planning depended heavily on these observations. Corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters, required careful timing of planting and harvest. Misjudging the first frost or the onset of rainy season could lead to crop failure and scarcity. By tracking celestial events, communities ensured that planting coincided with optimal soil and sunlight conditions, while harvest occurred before frost or drought threatened the yield. Sky observation became a tool for survival, aligning human labor with the cycles of nature. Ritual life was intertwined with temporal observation. Ceremonies marking solstices, equinoxes, lunar phases, or significant star risings were timed according to the same markers used for agriculture. The movement of the heavens guided communal events, storytelling, and spiritual observances. In this way, temporal knowledge reinforced cultural identity, ethical norms, and cosmological understanding, creating a profound connection between human life and the universe. Observing the sky also required precise methodology. Seasonal changes were tracked through repeated observation, careful note of shadows, horizon positions, and the relative location of stars. Elders often conducted these observations from elevated positions, taking advantage of unobstructed views. Alignments were verified over years, and discrepancies were carefully discussed and corrected. This iterative approach ensured that temporal predictions remained accurate, blending empirical observation with cultural practice. Yet challenges remained. Whether cloud cover or shifting landscapes could obscure celestial markers, and reliance on human memory meant that observational knowledge had to be passed meticulously between generations. Communities developed redundancy by constructing multiple aligned markers, integrating stars, solstices, and lunar cycles into a cohesive system. Observation, adaptation, and intergenerational transmission became essential for the reliability of sky-based timekeeping. Even in the absence of written records, Native American sky observatories provided remarkably precise guidance. By combining empirical observation, ceremonial practice, and communal teaching, these societies developed a temporal framework that guided survival, ritual, and social cohesion. Each sunrise, each rising star, became both a practical cue and a spiritual signpost, connecting daily life with the eternal movement of the heavens. Yet questions persisted in the minds of observers. Could these methods account for subtle shifts over decades or centuries? How could knowledge be preserved during times of upheaval or migration? And how would communities adapt as environmental conditions changed? These uncertainties underscore the careful attention, patience, and cultural transmission necessary to maintain sky-based temporal systems. In watching the heavens, Native American communities discovered a powerful tool for survival and social cohesion. Time became both measurable and meaningful, linking agriculture, ceremony, and communal life to the patterns of sun, moon, and stars. Observation transformed the sky into a living calendar, guiding human activity while reinforcing cultural knowledge, identity, and resilience, a quiet but profound mastery of celestial rhythms. Across the landscapes of North America, from the Great Plains to the deserts of the Southwest, the meticulous observation of celestial movements became the backbone of survival and social organization. Native American communities relied on sky observatories not merely for abstract knowledge, but as a practical guide to timing the essential rhythms of life, planting crops, harvesting food, hunting game, and preparing for seasonal changes. Each alignment of sun, moon, or stars was interpreted with care, ensuring that daily work was synchronized with natural cycles. Agriculture was perhaps the most immediate beneficiary of celestial observation. Corn, beans, and squash staples across many communities required planting at the precise moment when soil and climate conditions were favorable. Observers watched the rising of key stars and the solstice positions of the sun to determine when frost would retreat or rainfall would begin. In the desert Southwest, the appearance of the Pleiades in the night sky signaled the impending rainy season, prompting irrigation, soil preparation, and ceremonial planting. In this sense, the heavens became a living agricultural calendar. Rituals and spiritual practice were deeply intertwined with temporal observation. Ceremonial cycles, from solstice festivals to lunar celebrations, were meticulously scheduled according to celestial markers. In some regions, stone or earthen structures amplified these markers. Shafts of sunlight would illuminate carved symbols, or shadows would fall precisely on significant mounds at specific times of the year. Such alignments were both practical guiding seasonal activities and symbolic, linking the human experience to cosmological order and reinforcing the community's shared understanding of time and meaning. Observatories also served social functions. Seasonal markers guided communal labor, such as coordinated planting or harvesting efforts, ensuring that resources were managed efficiently and that food security was maintained. They allowed dispersed communities to synchronize activities over wide areas, with multiple observation points providing consistent temporal guidance. Shared knowledge of celestial cycles reinforced social cohesion, enabling collective action across geographic and familial networks. The construction and maintenance of these observatories demanded expertise and collaboration. Stones were carefully positioned, mounds sculpted to align with solstice sunrises, and horizon features chosen to enhance sightlines for distant star risings. Elders and spiritual leaders instructed younger generations in observation, interpretation, and ceremonial practice, ensuring continuity of knowledge. Observation was iterative. Repeated monitoring and cross-referencing of celestial events refined predictions and corrected errors over time, blending empirical rigor with cultural practice. Challenges, however, were ever present. Clouds, storms, and seasonal variability could obscure critical markers. Environmental changes, erosion, shifts in vegetation, or the movement of riverbeds could alter sightlines and necessitate adjustments. Communities mitigated these uncertainties through redundancy, creating multiple observation points, integrating lunar and solar cycles, and maintaining careful oral records of prior observations. Human vigilance was as essential as the physical instruments themselves. Timekeeping also extended to hunting and resource management. Seasonal migration of game, the ripening of wild plants, and the availability of freshwater were all predicted with reference to celestial events. By observing patterns in the sky, hunters and gatherers aligned their movements and strategies with the environment, reducing risk and maximizing success. Knowledge of the heavens became a tool of survival, connecting human decision-making to the rhythms of the natural world. Yet questions lingered in the minds of observers. Could these methods remain accurate over decades, especially as environmental conditions shifted? How could knowledge be preserved and transmitted across generations without written records? And how might communities adapt when long-term climatic cycles disrupted familiar patterns? Such uncertainties illustrate the delicate balance between careful observation, cultural transmission, and the unpredictability of nature. Through persistent observation, disciplined record-keeping, and communal teaching, Native American communities transformed the sky into a precise and meaningful temporal guide. Each sunrise, sunset, and star rising marked more than the passage of hours. It structured labor, ritual, and social interaction. By integrating celestial observation with cultural knowledge, these societies created a framework in which survival, spirituality, and community life were inseparably linked. The sky, observed with patience and care, became both calendar and clock. Seasonal cycles, agricultural timing, and ceremonial observances were aligned with the movements of sun, moon, and stars. Communities learned to read the heavens as a practical living guide, creating a temporal system that required neither written numbers nor mechanical devices. Observation, interpretation, and shared knowledge ensured that life flowed in harmony with nature's rhythms, bridging the cosmic and the human in a continuous, disciplined cycle. Yet, even with careful observation, mysteries remained. The subtle shifts in stellar positions, the variability of seasonal rainfall, and the unexpected challenges of environmental change. These uncertainties required constant vigilance and intergenerational teaching, ensuring that knowledge of the sky remained both practical and culturally embedded. In observing the heavens, Native American communities cultivated a profound understanding of time, season, and survival, a quiet mastery of celestial patterns that shaped life, labor, and ritual in intimate harmony with the natural world. As the seasons turned and the sun traced its annual path across the sky, Native American communities relied on the lessons of the heavens to structure life across generations. The knowledge embedded in stone circles, earthen mounds, cliff alignments, and carefully observed star patterns created a temporal framework that guided not only agricultural activity but social, spiritual, and ceremonial life. The sky became a living calendar, connecting human endeavor with the cycles of the natural world. Elders and spiritual leaders played a crucial role in maintaining this knowledge. They observed subtle shifts in sunrise, sunset, and star positions, teaching younger members to recognize celestial cues and interpret their implications. Children learn not through written instruction but by careful practice, watching shadows fall along mounds, noting the rising of key constellations, and participating in seasonal rituals that mirrored the sky. Knowledge was embedded in cultural practice, ensuring that timekeeping was simultaneously practical, social, and sacred. Agriculture remained tightly linked to these celestial observations. Corn, beans, and squash required precise timing for planting and harvest, while the ripening of wild plants and migration of game depended on seasonal cues. Sky observatories allowed communities to anticipate environmental changes, reducing the risk of crop failure or food scarcity. Each solstice or star rising was a signal. Labor, celebration, or preparation could begin with confidence, ensuring that human activity remained synchronized with nature's rhythm. Ritual life and spiritual observance were inseparable from this temporal framework. Ceremonies marking solstices, equinoxes, and lunar phases were timed with precision, often guided by stone or earth markers aligned with the horizon. These events reinforced cultural cohesion, connecting individuals to their community, ancestors, and cosmology. The sky provided not only practical guidance, but also moral and spiritual structure, reminding observers of the impermanence and cyclical nature of life. Sky observatories also served as social organizers. Seasonal festivals, communal labor, and hunting expeditions were coordinated according to celestial cues, linking dispersed groups into synchronized activity. The predictable patterns of the sun and stars created shared temporal expectations, reducing uncertainty and reinforcing social cohesion. Through observation and transmission of knowledge, communities achieved remarkable coordination without written calendars or mechanical devices. Yet challenges persisted. Environmental changes such as shifting riverbeds, erosion, or forest growth could obscure markers. Weather and seasonal anomalies required careful observation and adaptation. Elders relied on redundancy, multiple observation points, oral histories, and overlapping markers to ensure continuity. Human vigilance, practice, and cultural transmission were critical to maintaining reliability. Knowledge of the sky was fragile without attentive care, but when preserved, it created a resilient system connecting generations. Despite these challenges, the system endured. Native American communities transformed the movements of the heavens into practical tools for survival, guidance, and cohesion. The rising sun, the shifting moon, and the patterns of stars became markers of labor, spiritual observance, and social coordination. Observation of the sky allowed communities to align human life with the natural world, turning celestial cycles into a rhythm that structured work, ritual, and cultural identity. Even in the face of uncertainty, famine, drought, or unexpected environmental change, the lessons of the sky offered a foundation for resilience. Observers knew that careful attention, intergenerational teaching, and communal vigilance could preserve knowledge that bridged generations. The sky itself became a teacher, Its cycles a reminder of mortality, continuity, and the inextricable link between human life and the cosmos. In listening to the patterns of sunrise, sunset, and star risings, Native American communities learned a profound lesson. Time is not merely measured but experienced, interpreted, and shared. By harmonizing labor, ritual, and social life with celestial rhythms, they cultivated a system of knowledge that was simultaneously practical, spiritual, and cultural. Each observation, each alignment of stone or shadow, became part of a living tradition, an enduring testament to human ingenuity and attentiveness in understanding and navigating the natural world. As night fell and constellations glimmered over fields and river valleys, observers paused to witness the familiar sky, knowing that tomorrow, the sun would rise in alignment with ancestral markers, guiding planting, labor, and ceremony. In this way, the heavens provided not only timekeeping but continuity, connecting generations through observation, practice, and shared understanding, a silent yet profound bridge between humans and the cosmos.